think Sherita's going to share for us. She'll run tech for us. I have a couple of my people on here as well, and I'll have them introduce themselves when we get started.
Just wanted to make sure that the capability was there.
Sherita, are you able to share?
Good. Okay, my phone says 9:30, my computer says 9:29, but we'll just go ahead and get started. Thank you all for joining us. This is the Safety Organized Practice Overview from DCFS. Cassie Walker is going to be our presenter today. She is the SOP Model Implementation Program Manager with DCFS. Before becoming in that role, she was a CPS specialist for a year after she started with DCFS as a caseworker in 2016. So if there's more information, Cassie, you want us to know, I'll let you share that and let you have it. Thank you.
All right. Well, I mean, Celeste pretty much covered most of it. I will say my time as a caseworker, I primarily spent in foster care. That's mostly what I did. So a lot of times, like when I'm talking about my perspective, it will be in relation to like a foster care case, which is fitting for y'all because I mean, as CASA, you generally, that's what you're involved with. But I also want to go ahead and I have a couple of my team on here that helped me train SOP across the state. So I apologize because I have two on here that I did not list because I didn't know they were going to be on. So I have Gail and Carla also, and I'll let them introduce themselves as well. But Carlee, you want to go ahead and start?
Yes, if my mouse will work. My name's Carlee Lott. I am housed in Area 5. So I have been with the agency going on 6 years. I've done a lot of different things, actually. I've done casework. I've been the community engagement specialist for a while, and then I ended up, before I transitioned as a TDM facilitator, I was in resource for several years. So that's a little background of myself with DCFS, but now I am helping Cassie with the rollout of SOP. So I'm an SOP statewide trainer and as well as a TDM facilitator when I get to do that at some point. So, and then you want me to let Gail or Sherita introduce themselves?
Yeah.
Okay.
Sherita, you want me to go? Hi, my name is Gail Lohr, and I am out of Area 1, which is Benton, Madison, Carroll, and Washington counties. And I started off as an investigator. I've been with the agency just shy of 4 years. And I worked as an investigator first, and then I moved into differential response, which is more of a preventative side of an investigation. It prevents families from going into investigations, or tries to at least. And then last year moved into becoming a TDM facilitator, team decision-making facilitator. And I am currently also a statewide trainer for safety organized practice.
Good morning, my name is Sherita Washington. I've been with the department for 2 years. I began as a foster care worker. I'm housed in St. Francis County. I'm a TDM facilitator for Area 9, Area 10. I've been doing state SOP since last year as well.
And I'm Carla Washington. I'm housed in Area 9. I have been with the agency for 4 years. I started as a program assistant. I did some casework, health services, and now I'm doing TDM and SOP trainings.
So that's pretty much my team. We are spread out across the state. So like depending on where like you know are a volunteer for CASA or work for CASA, there is somebody you can reach out to. So you could reach out to any of us 5. And I'll make sure you have all of our email addresses at the end of this. So people, if you have questions, you can follow up. And we can go ahead and move on, Sherita. So we work with a company, they're a nonprofit called Evident Change, and that's like essentially they own all the rights to the materials. And so their mission is really, they want to help systems improve. And they want to help systems professionals and communities get to the root of the biggest challenges and give them the tools and knowledge to achieve better outcomes for everyone involved. And because when we join forces with those who work in our systems and the people they serve, we make our systems and our society more equitable from the inside out. And, if we do not improve as a system, then we cannot fully serve these families to the best of our abilities. And so that's really what Evident Change seeks to do. And so we work very closely with them, and that's their mission statement, which is essentially what I had just said. So we can go ahead and go to the welcome introductions, which our team has already introduced ourselves, but if maybe y'all could just drop into the chat, what your role is. I know Celeste, you had mentioned inviting some attorneys, so I don't know if we have some attorneys on here. So if you could just say like whether you're with CASA, you're an attorney, or whatever maybe your role is within the child welfare system, and then what county you work in, just so we can kind of have an idea of who all we have here. Awesome. So looks like we have a good mix. We have some Pulaski and some people from Area 2 and Area 3. Shout out to the person in White County. I started in White County. That's where I did my casework. So. Okay, I think we're good. We can go, like I said, I just want to kind of have a general idea, but it looks like we're pretty spread out all over the state. So safety organized practice model, the top priorities. So safely stabilize and preserve families. And then if that's not possible, we want to safely reunify children to their families of origin. And then if that's not possible, we want to safely create new permanent families for children. Could you just give me like a thumbs up or like a yes in chat if you feel like that kind of already aligns with what we're trying to do, within the child welfare system? A couple thumbs up. So safety organized practice is really like this umbrella approach. It encompasses a lot of different like child welfare techniques, and even, I guess in some ways, like it is some stuff that's kind of pulled, from like therapeutic techniques in a way. We definitely are not doing therapy, but like we do use a lot of like solution-focused questions. That's what we're training on, and like motivational interviewing type things, to help our staff have a better knowledge on how to really interview and have successful assessments. So it incorporates the best of structured decision making, which is a set of research-based support assessment tools. So like we'll be replacing our health and safety assessment. We'll be replacing our risk assessment. We'll be doing away with cans and FAST eventually. We're not there yet, but eventually we'll be doing away with that and have a new tool for that. And then we'll also get a risk reassessment and a reunification assessment to see if we, that way we can really assess if the family's risk level is coming down throughout our involvement. And so also that it also incorporates the best of Andrew Turnerell's signs of safety. And so that's a strengths and solution focused approach to child welfare casework, along with other critical innovations such as trauma-informed practice, solution-focused interviewing, and more. And it creates a rigorous child welfare practice model that is being used. It's used in many other states. It's used in other countries. So it's a pretty well-known approach. And, we want to build a better partnership and help preserve families. And so safety organized practice really has three main goals, and that's the development of good working relationships, the use of critical thinking and decision support tools, and building collaborative plans to enhance daily child safety. The term safety organized practice was first used by Andrew Turnell to describe a day-to-day approach to child welfare casework that keeps a clear focus on assessing and enhancing child safety. And it was developed out of the need for critical thinking and enhanced partnerships. And then a lot of like the underpinnings of SOP stem from Insoo Kim Berg's solution-focused practice. And like I said, this really is hopefully a model that will help us build better partnerships, with everybody within the child welfare system. DCFS and CASA, DCFS, CASA, and attorneys, literally everybody involved. We want to help build the better partnerships. And then also, help our staff within DCFS critically think better. And I think, even when I was a worker, it'd be hard. Like I always wanted to call my supervisor and have them make the decision, because then, it wasn't going to always fall back on me. There was kind of that like safety blanket, if you will. But that's not always the best approach. Like we really want our staff to be able to critically think on their own. And when they go into court, have the confidence to, say what's been going on and really find the words to articulate what they're worried about within the family. And so we're going to look further at each of these 3 goals. We'll kind of break them down and give you some of the different tools that we've been training our staff on within those. So the first one is good working relationships. Everything we do in child welfare relies on relationships characterized by trust. And when we have trust, we get far more accurate information. And, so we really have to build that trust with the families. And so the 2 areas under this are rigorous balanced assessment, which we'll go into a lot more in depth here in just a few, and then strategies for talking with children. And we'll also cover some tools specifically that we're training staff on so that they can, they have better tools when they're, talking with children, interviewing children to get better information. And it's not just the normal, like, I went to this home visit, hey, how are you doing? Very standard. We want to get deeper than that. We want to know what that child is actually feeling and thinking and how we can best serve them. And then the next is critical thinking, as I had mentioned earlier. And, cognition or mindset is largely guided by the questions that we ask ourselves. So this is really where like the structured decision-making assessment tools will come in. I know that like assessments, they guide us to the right decision. They don't make the decision for us, but with structured decision-making, once that's fully implemented, it will give our staff more consistent and like equitable ways of making decisions. Right now, we have staff, like we have one person who could look at a case and another person could look at a case and come to 2 completely different conclusions, right? I'm sure it's similar with CASA, like if you're looking at different cases, y'all may have very different opinions about what needs to happen. And so with those decision support tools, that should really help like guide our staff in the right direction and make it more consistent for, in the decisions they're making for the families. And then within this, there also is something we call the collaborative assessment and planning framework. And it's essentially where you break down everything about a case into, different sections and can really see it on paper. And it's meant to be, you can do it in like case consultation. So whether it's just like a supervisor worker, or it could be done in like a staffing setting where you have all the parties involved. You have the family, you have CASA, you have the attorneys. So you really get everybody's voice, and we'll cover it more later as well. And then worry statements. And worry statements are designed to answer the question in family-friendly language, what are we worried about happening in the future if nothing changes with this family? And then our 3rd goal, collaborative safety and case plans. And so within this, we have goal statements, and those mirror the worry statements and define what we would need to be happening to reunify as a family or close a case. And then safety and support networks must be included in planning to support the family's behavioral change process. So that is one thing I really want y'all to take away from this. And I know that I feel like y'all really appreciate as CASA, is safety organized practice really focuses on that behavioral change piece and not just completing services. I know, in my experience with DCFS, like I have seen it time and time again where like, it's just, here's your cookie cutter services, check your boxes. And then we go to court and we're like, well, the parent's done everything we've asked them to, but really there hasn't been that behavioral change piece. And so, we really want to focus more on that. Like, we want to see the actual behavioral change. And that's why we want to work on creating these goal statements with family that tell them exactly what that behavioral change is we need to see. Because I know I've worked with a lot of families that probably couldn't have told me, what they actually need to do, like to change about their behavior in order to close their case. Like, yeah, if I had asked them, they probably would have been like, oh, well, I need to go to parenting classes, or I need to complete substance abuse treatment. So we want to move away from that. And like I said, really focus on that behavioral change. And as well as within that, really building a support network for them, helping them build that support network. That way they're not relying on us entirely. Because when our time with them is limited. So at some point we're going to step out, but we still want to ensure that that child's safe. And so the more people we can get involved in their lives on the front end, there are going to be more people that are making sure that child is safe even once we step out. And then, yeah, I pretty much covered it. And so here are just kind of our definitions of what like safety and belonging are. In most cases, we are working with a caregiver, and we define safety as actions of protection taken by the caregiver and network that address the danger and are demonstrated over time. So we're really looking for safety as that actions of protection, and it's shown over a period of time. And again, this kind of goes back to safety is not just completing a list of services and us expecting them to change everything about how, they live with their child, how they parent their child. And then for older youth, safety and belonging is really strengths demonstrated as protection are when a youth's behaviors begin to promote their own safety and well-being. And when thinking about their sense of belonging, it could also be defined as actions of connection taken by the caregiver and the network that promote enduring relationships to family, community, and culture that are demonstrated over time. And I think that's something that tends to get lost a lot of times, especially for like our youth that kind of, tend to linger in care or they age out of the system. Like, we don't focus as much around building that safety and belonging for them by, building lifelong connections for them. So we need to focus more on making sure that they have those lifelong connections and stay, connected to their culture. All right, so if y'all could drop into the chat, talked about 3 main goals. So development of good working relationship, use of critical thinking and decision support tools, and building collaborative plans to enhance daily child safety. What I've covered so far, what are y'all most excited to learn about today? And you can just put it in the chat, or you could unmute. Okay, real change, yeah, that's a big one. Okay, pretty consistent in behavioral change. Yeah, I figured that's what y'all would be most excited about. I know that's sometimes a battle that we tend to have. Is really, really focusing on getting that behavioral change rather than just completing services. So it's one thing that I'm most excited about with safety organized practice. And I think our people that have really started taking it on with DCFS are already seeing some of that change. And so the first thing we are going to cover, though, is we're going to talk about the good working relationships. So that rigorous and balanced assessment. I will say, this is a pretty high level overview. So if everything doesn't click today, that's okay. We can either, we can always do follow-up trainings. If that's something y'all are interested, you could reach out to one of us and we will answer any questions you have. Also today, like during the training, if you have any questions, feel free to, you can drop them in the chat. You can unmute and ask us. We're pretty open to however you want to ask questions today. And I'm okay to go to 12:30 if y'all are. I know that we originally were supposed to stop at 12, so that y'all can kind of just let us know if that's something y'all want to do.
So Cassie kind of already introduced the rigorous and balanced assessment, and I do have a case example that I'm going to get to share with you guys that's in detail, so you guys kind of have an example. That's how I learn the best, is when I have something to look at, and I'm a very visual person, so I love those case examples. But just like type in the chat or unmute. You guys can unmute and talk to us because it's pretty long training. We're here till noon. So it'll make it more interesting if you guys do want to talk to us. But if you can just unmute or type in the chat what you guys think we mean by rigorous balance and assessments. Does anyone have an idea?
I'll unmute because I think I'm showing up as Celeste when I put in the chat. But I think it's really like what we see now is the only check-in is staffing and court. And I think that rigorous balance and assessment probably has to do with just a constant check-in system on how things are going rather than just waiting until, our 3 months time limit's up and we check in.
Yes. Yeah. Does anyone have anything else to say about that before we kind of dive into that? Thank you so much, Angie. No, Cassie, do you have anything before I go on?
No, I think you're good. Take it away.
Okay. All right. So looking at this next slide, I want you guys to kind of look at this, and Sherita, if you can take me to the next one. So I want you guys to type in the chat what you guys see. What's the first thing that you guys see when you look at this picture? So while everyone's typing in the chat, you guys can kind of look in the chat and see that there's different answers. So we have some people seeing people, there's chess pieces, there's candlesticks, there's white pieces. So they're all different. And so when looking at that, it kind of, it puts it into perspective of how we all have multiple perspectives about any situation that we're talking about. So we have to be able to hold multiple truths at the same time when we're conducting our assessments. So going into our illustration or a case example, so we're going to talk about Cheryl, and this is a story. This case is actually a real case, correct, Cassie? That it's out of another jurisdiction that Evident Change had.
I want to say Massachusetts.
That's what I was thinking. And so I just wanted to kind of let you guys know it wasn't just like a made up thing. This is a real story that we got to use. And so real family and real people. But anyway, so when we're talking about the next series of slides coming up, there's going to be several aspects of what we're learning. So it's going to include the importance of the balanced assessment. So when talking about Cheryl, as you can see, we've got her family on here. Cheryl is a divorced mother of 2 who's had a close relationship with her mom and even more so her aunt. And we're going to learn more about her involvement in CPS on the next few slides. So when going into understanding the worries of Cheryl, so Cheryl made a significant suicide attempt by turning on the gas of her oven while both her children were home. All 3 passed out, and it was only by a neighbor smelling the gas and breaking down the door that more serious injuries were averted. Her children were placed together in foster care, and Cheryl went to a psychiatric facility and was released 10 days later. She is currently not suicidal and is expressing a lot of regret for her choices. So you met with her, when we meet with her later, we're doing that standard assessment. And so her father was abusive to her and her mother, and he drank and smashed things around the home. Things got so bad that Cheryl went into foster care herself. As she got older, Cheryl engaged in relationships with men who were violent and including their father of the girls. And then this finally led to Cheryl being diagnosed with depression. And more recently, she's gone off of her medication. So even more recently, Cheryl has lost her job as a clerk at a store, leaving the family dangerously close to poverty without enough food to eat or money to keep the heat on in the home. So normally when we hear a story like this, we begin to connect the dots and to make the sense of the story, and we can construct a narrative of these events so we can make sense of it and compare it to other experiences and stories and training. So when talking about Cheryl, given on what we know, what would you guys say about what Cheryl's future is like? Are we even in a position to make a good educated guess about her future with knowing what we know?
Initially, I'd say it's just going to be more of the same without any interventions.
And so what do we know about the danger? We can talk about, because we had a lot in the past slide about that. So what do we know about the danger?
She's a danger to not only herself, but to her children at this point.
Yeah.
Without intervention, that's what the future looks like too.
Mm-hmm. And so that leads us to the next thing of talking about safety. We don't have much safety at this point in the case either. So, and you can take it back to the next slide, Sherita. Sorry, I'm hopping from each slide. So does that get in our way of making a good guess of what Cheryl is likely to be able to do next to keep her kids safe in the future? We need to become equally rigorous and tracking the history of the parents of acts of protection as we're tracking the history of the danger. So when we look at Cheryl's past, how much trauma was present? Quite a bit, right? So when you're looking back at that, we have the physically abusive father that bled over into her relationships when she was an adult, and even the child's father. So when talking about all of that, that has a lot of trauma that had been in her past. And so that bleeds over into her present because she has the child with the father. She's struggling with depression. So how do you guys think that affects her ability to parent? Probably quite a bit, right? Because we've got a lot going on in the home, especially that she's no longer taking her medication for her depression. And so that's stuff that we have to look back before we can move forward in how we're going to work her case, with her kids coming into foster care. So when looking for our expectations with Cheryl, so if we're listening, when we begin to ask for details, we may hear a lot of positives as well. And we need to be equally rigorous in searching for the history of protection as the history of the harm. So when Cheryl tells us about this moment, we can ask her a lot of details. So in the next few slides, it tells us the rest of Cheryl's story so we can get the full story. So we learn that before turning on the gas, she took all of the girls in the next room and opened a window. And was that sufficient act of protection? No. But would it be enough to return her children and or close the case? That's a no also. But it's something that you can use as a positive when you're talking to mom and telling her, she tried to protect them in the best way she could in the mental state that she was at that time. But it is important to remember that when she's dealing, when she, it said before in the very beginning of the slide that, she had a lot of grief when she realized after she was getting out of the psychiatric hospital, like what she had done. And so when she's in that state and you're talking to her of the sadness and the grief and the guilt about the event, you can pull this positive and tell her, like, you know, we do see that you did try to protect them, even though it wasn't an appropriate act of protection to keep them out of foster care. That was something that she was trying to do. So it is important for us as child welfare to know those things. And as part of the larger story, her act of protection, you know, we can use these things to ask questions like, were there times that you were protected by your parents, or things that you have done to keep your girls safe, to learn more about those things that you can pull from of the positive things, even though she does have a future that's pretty traumatic, or a past that's pretty traumatic. So when looking at what's working well with Cheryl, the foster care arrangement was, sorry, there's people outside my door, so if you can hear them, sorry. It gets distracting when you're training. So Cheryl's mom stayed in her life and worked with her aunt and Cheryl's foster parent to make sure that she did get a high school diploma. Cheryl reached the point of leaving her husband and took out a restraining order when she saw how violent he could be with the girls, watching, saying, I will not have my girls go through what I did. There are many examples of appropriate care Cheryl has shown the girls. The pediatrician says that she has been terrific and the kids are up to date. And the school says the kids come to school dressed appropriately, on time, with all of their work completed. And both are very surprised at what had happened to the family. Cheryl knows that foster mom who is taking care of her kids, they went to high school together, and Cheryl has been getting up at 4 a.m. and walking more than 2 miles from her home to foster mom's home to get the girls up and off to school every morning since she got out of the psychiatric hospital. So take a look at all of the strengths that Cheryl has. How do we think that those relationships helped to minimize the impact on her past trauma? And how can we build on that?
Well, I think it's really great that she has a relationship with this foster mom already, and that's made it so much easier for her to get involved with her kids. And I know that's so important, and we have a lot of foster parents that are really agreeable to do that, and I think it makes a really big difference in reunification if the foster parents are, you know, more open to that kind of relationship with the parents.
I agree. All of my successful reunification cases that I had when I was a caseworker, the foster parents still have a relationship with the kids, and it's a big deal because, you know, when those kids get taken out of our foster homes, like, they're sad too. And so if they keep those relationships going, then they'll still be able to have that contact with them after they go back with the parents. And obviously not every situation they can be as involved, you know, depending on why the kids are in foster care. But for the most part, I agree 100%, Denise, just with everything that I've seen also. So I'm talking a little bit more about what's working well with the family. When we put the events together, do we know more about their safety now after mom's been out of the psychiatric hospital? And we've talked to different people that have been involved with the family's life. So it does show us, the safety. It's you know, when talking with the school, even, it was talking about how they were super surprised, as well as their doctor. And it does show us what kind of a parent that mom was. It's just been getting off of her medication and the depression that took a toll on her. And so she is out of the psychiatric hospital now, so we can look at her case in a different way and look at it, and we do know about her safety now. So when talking about naive practice, we cannot lose sight of the danger, but this is where, when we look at this, if this is where if this is where we all looked at it, would it be enough to know about the safety? And if we do look at it like this, it would be fair to call that the naive practice. So does anyone have any questions about this? Cassie, do you have anything else to add?
I just want to say, like, if we're only looking at, you know, what works well, like that would be considered naive practice, right? Because we can't just look at one side. And the same is true for if we just look at the danger or what we're worried about. Like the whole point of the rigorous balance assessment is to get both sides of that. We really need to know, like, what is this family doing well? What are their actions of protection, as well as the danger? And I think, you know, child welfare has a history of just like, we're there for a problem, and so that's all we're going to look at, right? Like, you know, I felt like whenever I would go do investigations when I was on call and stuff, like, you know, that was kind of how I looked at it. Like, I'm here to figure out what this problem is, but I was not always as good at getting like what that family was really doing well. And what those actions of protection the family already had. And so, you know, this is really a push that we have to get the full story. We can't just have half of the story, either side of it. You know, we can't just have what the parent does well, and we can't just have what it is that they're not doing so well at.
So only knowing about the dangers in the home or in the case can also be considered as naive practice. We have to get the full story of what's going on with the family, and, you know, have those conversations with those people that do have contact with families every day and following up with them and seeing how they were parenting before we had to intervene in that. So when talking about rigorous and balanced assessment, why we do this is if we do not know what is working well, we do not know how worried we need to actually be, and we stay focused on what everyone is willing and able to do to keep the child safe in the future. So it's essentially sustainable safety. So before we move on into working across differences, does anyone have any questions or comments about the rigorous and balanced assessment?
Sherita, can you move us on? Yep, there you go. In this slide, I mean, Carlee pretty much already covered it, but like this is just showing that, you know, we need both of the negatives and the positives to really get that rigorous and balanced assessment. Is there something with Cheryl's story that y'all can think of that we did not cover that might be important to know?
Well, I might have missed this, but she got off her meds. Was that a financial reason she got off her meds, or did she just decide she didn't need them anymore? You know, because that's a big deal that she stays on her meds.
Yeah, I'm not really sure what it was. We didn't, you know, because it did come from a different state, like we don't have the full details. So yeah, I don't know if it was financial or if she just felt like she didn't need them. So one thing that we also, like, I'm sure there are other things because I know it's a full case, so there are a lot of questions, right? We can't cover it all right now, but one thing that we didn't bring anything about was her culture or her race, and that's really important when working with families. You know, in working with them across differences means a lot of different things. It's not just race, you know, that's different socioeconomic statuses, different education levels, like all of that comes into play. So when we hold positions of power relative to the family we're working with, the distance between our shore and theirs increases. So when you have things in common with somebody, it is like walking across a small bridge. It can be easy and it's simple, but the more things you have in common, the easier it is to communicate. Then on the other hand, the more differences, the harder it becomes to communicate. And so that's like crossing the longer bridge. And so we have to work harder to understand each other when we have a lot of differences. And we have to be aware of how much difference exists, because we have to be able to build that bridge and span it. And like I said earlier, you know, sometimes that's a small bridge, sometimes it's a large bridge. It just depends on who you're working with, and that's going to be different for everybody. But like something that is important to remember is those with power bear the primary responsibility for understanding the bridge that is needed and constructing it. And so like we talk, you know, a lot to our staff around, like, you know, we hold a lot of power with that badge. You know, I can go into somebody's house and take their kid. And, you know, there's not always a whole lot of questions asked about that. And so just being aware that, like, you know, we have to make that step to really build that bridge with our families. And it's same, you know, like it doesn't just, you know, go with like worker to family. I mean, that can be when you're working with a supervisor, like that supervisor has that power. And so they bear that responsibility to build that bridge, you know, to help with getting past those differences and really putting those differences out in the open so that you can work through them. And so kind of within this, like, so SOP includes multicultural skill building to help us tailor our approach to the ways in which we are different from our clients, and helps us to have practical ways to avoid miscommunication throughout the life of our engagement. So historically within our field, we have defined a family by the act that brought them to our attention. So, you know, it's the substance abuse family, it's the parent with depression, it's the parent who shook her baby. Like, that's how we define people. It's just a habit we have within our system. And that only gives them one identity. We identify families as the abuse that we are worried about, as if that is all they are. So for example, you know, Cheryl is the mother who tried to kill herself with her children in the home. But is this all that we need to know? I mean, it's definitely not. You know, what do we need to know about their culture? Can we truly understand a family or anyone if we do not know anything about their culture? You know, we tend to say, I don't want to see color, or I don't want to see differences. But we do see differences, and the differences do matter. And so really, you know, we need to be good at talking with our families, talking with coworkers, talking, you know, maybe you're Casa, you work with a DCFS worker and you have a lot of differences, you know, working those out. So taking time to really, like I said, build that bridge, and knowing that people have more than one identity, and people have multiple identities. And I think this may come up a little later, but like one thing that really spoke to me, like when I started working with safety organized practice, was Heather Miner. She works with Evident Change. She's kind of like our lead person there that helps us with the rollout. But she would talk about how all behavior makes sense with enough information. And I think that's so true. It does not necessarily mean that the behavior that they're doing is right or wrong. That's not what I'm saying. But if we have enough information about somebody, you know, we know about their culture, their background, kind of like with Cheryl, like, you know, we learned a lot about Cheryl during that time that made things make more sense about what she did. And so really, like I said, taking that time to get to know people and recognizing that they are more than just what led them to being involved with the system, or, you know, like I said, even with like coworkers or DCFS staff or attorneys, like you may have one view of them, but outside of, you know, court or a meeting, or they have so many other identities that come into play whenever they are, you know, in court or in a meeting, or when you're working with a family. Yes, everybody has a story. And so the next slide, this slide captures some of the guiding principles for laying the foundations to increase the likelihood of successful outcomes of trying to connect across differences. So successfully working across differences, there has to be necessary, difficult, painful dialogue to help eradicate, you know, oppression and strengthen relationships. And then there also needs to be some multicultural agreements to help cross-cultural interactions to incorporate cultural perspectives and expertise. And I don't know, Celeste, did you get a chance to email out the participant guide?
I did not, but I can put it in the chat.
Okay. you want to drop it in chat. So we do have a participant guide that has a lot of like more information on safety organized practice that y'all can look through. But actually on page 2 of the participant guide, there is a set of multicultural guidelines. I think there's 8 of them. I can't remember off the top of my head right now. But they just kind of can help be tools to guide you through a difficult conversation maybe you're having with somebody that you have differences with. And so the multicultural guidelines we've been teaching to our staff, but they can help us avoid kind of those misses and be much more respectful of one another in our practice, both in the office and with families. And so I encourage y'all to look over those multicultural guidelines whenever you have a minute, and just to kind of, like I said, it can, and to me, they are good guidelines that apply more to just that. I mean, like there are things like try on somebody else's idea before you just jump to judge them. Making sure that you're keeping a both and attitude. So like people can have multiple truths, we know this in child welfare, right? Like we have a parent that maybe has extremely neglected their child, but we also know that parent loves their child very much. It shouldn't be a but. We need to make sure it's an and. So just keeping those at the forefront when we're working with families, I think will be helpful. Are there any questions around that? All right. We can move on to our next slide, Sherita. Yes, Gail, that is a great one. Another one of our evident change people talks about a lot in her trainings is that her mom always talked about, you have to take off your own shoes before you try to walk in somebody else's shoes. It doesn't just help to step into somebody else's shoes with your shoes on, right? You got to take your own off first. So the 3 questions, and this is kind of, this is really the guide to get us a rigorous and balanced assessment. It's very simple. The 3 questions are, what are we worried about? What is working well, and what needs to happen? At their most basic, both safety organized practice and formal assessments can be boiled down to these 3 questions. Every interview, every stage in the life of a case, from the hotline all the way through, right? These are the 3 questions that we need the answers to. While they are very simple, they can be very nice in like the heat of the moment. When you're in the middle of a complicated assessment or a home visit, or maybe you're in a complicated staffing, it is helpful to have, simple maps or guides to remind us where we want to go. And the details of how we ask these questions and what content to focus on will change, but these are the 3 most central questions. These can also help prepare, the caregiver, family members, collaterals, whoever we're talking to, even the children for the interview. Because when we tell them, I'm going to be asking you a lot of questions, but they all boil down to these 3, we help prepare them for the interview. And it starts us off on the right foot for collaboration and helps them better prepare to participate. And I do want to point out, so the wording of these questions are very intentional. So what are we worried about? Worry to me seems a lot less intimidating than, what are you concerned about? Concerned is very formal, or like, when you go to a family and say, I have a lot of concerns, it can kind of come across as, I don't know, like you're judging them or different things. So the worry is really very intentionally in how we word it. And so that's also just something to keep in mind. And so in addition to the 3 questions, we want to focus on the impact of a parent's behavior shaped by the underlying need on the child, and that can be very helpful. So like what we're saying here is we want to ask questions that reveal the caregiver, the behavior. So what is the caregiver's behavior, and what is that impact it's having on the child? Because that really tells us if this child is in danger, or it could be the opposite. It could be the what is working well side of things, right? What is that parent doing that helps protect the child and ensure safety? But it all comes down to that caregiver's behavior. And how is it impacting the child? So if you don't take a whole lot away from today, that is one thing that I do want you to take away is caregiver behavior impact. And we will go more in depth into this here in a little bit on how to kind of talk through this. But it is very important and keeps everybody focused on, what is the caregiver doing that actually impacts this child, and not worrying about like some of all the background noise that may not actually be an impact on the child, right? We have a lot of stuff that comes up in cases that really at the end of the day, like doesn't have a major impact on the child. So we really want to get good at naming what that parent is doing that impacts the child, whether it's in conversations with referral sources or with family members. FSWs can encourage others to identify the children's caregivers, the caregivers' behaviors, and their impact of these behaviors on the child. And although the parent may have done something or failed to do something, what we are most concerned about are behaviors that have had a significant impact on the child. So imagine that a mother drove home from, following a night out of drinking at the bars. When she arrived home, her children were asleep and safe because they were with their grandmother who had been watching them. And the next morning, the children noticed that their mother was a little grumpy. But it did not seem to bother them. While the mother's behavior in itself could be worrisome, it has no bearing on, child protection, because it did not seem to have any impact on the children. And so focusing on the impact can really, it requires some practice. And I think it's something our staff has really had to make an adjustment to. And Carlee, I don't know if you want to talk any more about that, but I think this is one of the key points of safety organized practice. And there's a handout on it in the participant guide. And I think it's an area that our staff has, struggled with in the past. And so this just touches on the what needs to happen. Once we know what we're worried about and the caregiver's actions that are having a harmful impact on the child and what is working well, we are in a position to begin to think through what needs to happen. Equally important is that we ask the families what they think needs to happen, and we begin to help them think through the implications of our assessments. When our 3 questions in our assessments become assessments with rather than assessments of the family, we can begin to jointly develop plans that help families move toward their goals and give new safe actions that address our worries. So organizational theorist Margaret Wheatley captures this neatly with this quote, people support what they have a hand in creating. I don't know what y'all's experience has been with this, but do you find a difference in our case plans? For example, like when we actually take the family's own wishes into account, or, what's the difference when, a caseworker just makes a case plan, slaps it on the table and is like, hey, you need to do all these things, versus when a caseworker would, sit down and actually create the case plan with the family. Have y'all seen any workers actually sit down with the family and create a case plan? Or is it pretty much just all, here's your case plan and these are the things you're expected to do?
I will openly talk about myself and say when I was a caseworker, we were in crisis, like most counties always are. And I know originally, we have a lot of people on here, but we're talking, this training was called Pulaski classes. So I'm sure you guys understand what crisis means. But when I first started as a caseworker, we were in crisis and we had no staff. So I was trained, you copy and paste this and you just get it out there. You got to get it done. You got to get it done. And so that's how I did them. And then I would get so frustrated and I would be having those conversations with my supervisor and the attorneys of they've done everything and they've checked all the boxes, but they didn't really do it. They're just doing it because I gave them that. And I never got it. I need to sit down with them and ask them, and I need to see that behavioral change. They just checked the boxes for me. And there were so many cases, and I was so frustrated during that time of saying, I said that so much, they're just checking the boxes. And then I'm sitting here in all of these trainings when we're getting to prepare to roll this out. And I'm like, this is where it's at. This is how it's going to change, the checking the boxes that, caseworkers, and I still hear it so much of, I'm frustrated. They've done everything, but they've just checked the boxes. And so that's my little spill about myself, because I can talk in the I statement of saying I didn't do that. And so I don't know what everyone else's experience is, but that was mine. So.
Yeah, Carlee, I agree with that. That was a lot of my experience as well. When we were in crisis, just copy, get them as done as quick as you can. I will say, a lot of times I would call a parent and be like, hey, this is what I'm thinking about including, what's your input on this? But even then, that's not really what we mean by collaboration, right? Like we want them to be sitting down with the family and really working through like, this is what needs to be on the case plan. This is why this needs to be on the case plan. How do you feel about this? What are your worries? What do you feel like could work well? Those sorts of conversations. And so next, we're going to move into solution-focused questions. And I just want to add, Carlee, because I know you're going to jump in here, but solution-focused questions are really a deeper way to get answers to the 3 questions. So the 3 questions are just very basic, but these really open it up to more of a conversation and helping the family ideally come up with their own solutions to their problems. And I'll let you take it from there.
Yeah, I mean, you already basically started it off. I talked a little bit about solution-focused questions, and then I can talk more when we go to the next slide about 3-column mapping, just because like Cassie said, you ask those 3 questions, but you really use the solution-focused questions in those conversations to create the outcome that you're wanting. So when talking a little bit about the solution-focused questions, there's 5 different types. So we have the exception, the scaling, position, coping, and preferred future. And training this across the state, scaling questions has been everyone's favorite. And that's, I've trained with resource and adoption specifically also, and they love that question too, because it's easy. You say from 0 to 10, how are you feeling today? Or on a scale of 0 to 10, you just ask those different, and you can mold these questions into like whatever you need, whatever situation you're talking about or you're in, you can change it and modify it how you need it to be. So I can kind of just go into, if it's okay, Cassie, unless you have something else to talk about solution-focused questions, we can go into the 3-column map if you want. Or you
I was just going to add that there is also a handout with some example solution-focused questions in the guide. And so if they want like some specific concrete examples, like y'all can check that out.
Yeah, because we're not going to cover them like this training, because sometimes we do cover each of them. It's not in here, right?
No, because I just feel like we had enough time.
We don't have enough time with you guys. So, but look at that example, because in some of the trainings we do spend and talking about each example. And so that will kind of give you an idea of, how to use the questions and like what each question is. But when talking about the 3-column map, and all of these tools that we're going to show you today, you just have to be, like my thing is I've told all the workers of trying it on, and then you'll see how well it works. But again, like we said in the beginning, if you guys have any questions, just unmute or type in the chat of your questions so we can answer them for you. But when looking at what we call the 3-column map, you're asking those 3 questions of what are we worried about, what is working well, and what needs to happen next. You do see underneath that scale, and so where 0 is unsafe and the child cannot come home, and 10 is the very safe that you can close the case, you can ask that scaling question of where we're at with this family on that scale, for them to kind of look at it. And then you can ask, if it's a 5, how can we move it up to a 6 and get to the goal, which would be 10. So Cassie, do we have time to show an example of the 3-column map really quick, or do I need to keep
I was
moving?
thinking we could talk through a couple of examples we had done.
Okay, so I can pull up the one, I was doing that a minute ago when you called me out. I was like, I need to pull these examples up. So that's why I didn't say anything. So I'm sorry.
No, you're fine. I do want to add just really quick. So because I know y'all are out there doing home visits with kids, you're talking to parents, things like that. The 3 questions are something very simple that y'all can start doing now, right? The next time you talk to a kiddo, you can ask them the 3 questions. So those are easy things for y'all to kind of start with.
Yeah. So we do have, and I could be wrong, it's been a little bit since we've talked about 3-column maps. My mind is on home goal statements because that's where we're at in deep dives. But we do have an example of Cheryls Story on the participant guide, right? Or no?
I don't think we have. I don't think there are 3-column maps in there. No, there's a CAP framework.
Okay. Well, I like to show examples of, and can you guys see that?
Yeah.
Okay. So I like to show examples that we've done in Arkansas, just because it makes it more, I don't know, it just seems to be more, I can't think of what the word I'm looking for, Cassie, if you can help me.
More relatable.
Yes, thank you. And especially when showing it to workers across the state, they think, oh, okay, well, that was done, in Boone County. Well, that's not that far from me, or they already know me. And so they're like, oh, Carlee did that, and I could do that too. Or they know this caseworker, for instance, is Mona, and so they know Mona. And so it just makes it more, like Cassie said, relatable. But this is a family that we had a PS case on, and I went out with the worker and we did it. I wrote all over paper. So I did not take my computer out and type all of this, because the family talks to you so fast. And in my experience, that's just easier. You can do it however you want. There's no guideline of exact way to do a 3-column map. But as you guys can see, we have that first column that is, what are we worried about? We have the what's working well, and we have what needs to happen next. And you guys can notice that it's very small on the what's working well column. And sometimes that happens, but we have to pull out the good, kind of like what we talked about earlier in the rigorous balance assessment. You have to find at least one thing in there, and you can dig deep and find that in families, even if it's the worst situation. But this family was and Cassie, can you kind of watch the chat since I'm screen sharing, and then just interrupt me if I need to stop? But
yeah.
This was started out with domestic, and we have a long history of domestic violence with this family, but then also some substance issues. But when we were sitting there talking with them, it was very, very obvious that their communication was off. And it was a very overwhelming home visit, to be completely honest with you guys. We were there for a really long time, but sometimes we talk about evidence change, how evidence change has said this, and they say it so many times, you have to go slow before you can go fast later. And that is so true in this instance, where normally we would go in, we would say, how are things going? What have you done for services? Check, done. And so we really sat down with this family, and I was there for a long time. And the caseworker was like, we've been here forever. But after we were done, she said, I think this has been the best home visit I've ever done with working with the department. And she's been here for almost 4 years, even though it was a long time, because now you have a goal. When you go in to talk with this family, we have a plan. You can come back to this 3-column map and say, the last time we were here, we talked about what you guys were going to do next. Did you do that? And how did it work? And you can build off of all of these tools. But, I use the solution focused questions when talking to them, and I would just ask them different ones to get the information. At one point of the assessment, mom went into the other room and was crying. And we talked to dad for a while, and then mom came back. But we needed to be there that long. And they needed to see that our goal is not to just, people think DCFS's main goal is to go in and take their children. And that is not why we're in these homes. We're in these homes to try and to offer those services to families. If kids are already in foster care, we're wanting to get these kids back with families. That's our goal. It's not our goal to keep these kids or to take these kids. And so really spending that time with them and developing those relationships with them. And so some of the things that I actually got on what are we worried about were from some of the caseworker, but most of it was from either mom or dad. And they would tell me, well, I'm worried that dad's doing this, or that I'm worried that mom's doing this. So, dad's been in jail for anger issues. We have other kids from a previous marriage that they're battling custody with. There's cheating going on. That's a huge problem with mom's eyes. And that's what starts the fights that go into domestic. Dad gets so stressed about mom's going off or yelling at him that he just would rather go use meth. So he leaves the home and uses meth. I mean, there's like a ton of things going on. Mom has PTSD and anxiety. I mean, the list goes on and on. But, when we first got there, I mean, Dad was cussing at us to get out of his home. And when we sat down and we were asking these questions and we're asking them of like, what do you want to see? How do you want to see that change? We did come up with a lot. And so in the good things, they do have a great bond with their child, and it's very obvious, and you could see that in the home visit. And so that's something that, we really we told them, and we praised them for that. Like, he loves you guys, and we have to fix what's going on here with your relationship before we can be out of your life, because we want what's best for the child. So the biggest thing that we decided, that is one of my favorites, and we came up with this with using those solution focused questions, was Mom and Dad agreed to work on their communication issues, and Dad agreed to give 20 minutes in the morning to talk and spend time together. They have one vehicle, and that was something that Mom was crying that he never gives her any quality time with him. So when they're driving to work in the morning, Dad agreed to have those conversations with Mom and give her that back in the 20 minutes. And then in return, Mom will let Dad spend quality time with their son when he gets off of work, because normally when Dad gets home, she's still doing everything and it's chaotic, and he wants that time with his son by himself because he's the main person that works in the home. And then Mom will get 20 minutes of time to relax in another room because she's a stay-at-home mom. And so that was a huge compromise for them, just because of all of the arguing that was going on in the home. And of course, we have a lot of other goals too. But this was, it took us a long time to get at that spot, because it was not an easy home visit. But now, because we took the time out of our day and sat down with them, they have a good relationship with the caseworker now. They have a plan on what's supposed to happen from now. And all around, the communication is better in the home and with DCFS. So before we move on, because I can't spend much time on the tools, which Cassie knows I can talk about the tools all day. But do you guys have any questions about this or comments about it?
I have two stories that I want to share really quick, Carlee.
Yeah.
So my experience with 3-column map. So I did one with a parent. They're still a foster parent, but they adopted a teenager when she was 16 years old. And I had gone out and was visiting with them, and she was just really defeated. And so I did a 3-column map with the adoptive mom, and it really just gave her time to talk through everything. And so that was like one thing. But one of the needed, we didn't come up with any great ideas. We weren't like, we're going to solve all the problems that a 16-year-old has with a lot of trauma. It wasn't that, but we talked about the, what are we worried about, and the what is working well. And so one thing that this adoptive parent said to me was that when the child came to her, she was probably functioning at about 10 to 15%. And that now she's probably functioning at about 40 to 45%. And that right there was just it was kind of cool to watch the adoptive mom process through, oh, I am making progress. We've gone up 30%, and this child has been in my home. She's probably been in her home for about a year at this point. And it, parenting a child with trauma looks a lot different than parenting a child that doesn't have trauma. And so really that adoptive parent just needed that reassurance that, okay, I am making progress. I'm, the things I'm saying, I'm trying to teach, they're not just going unheard. So there is improvement. And they just needed that. That was all they needed. And like I said, we didn't come up with some great, needs to happen next steps. But just giving that time to really talk. And so they could see that even on paper. And we actually did, I think, ours on a whiteboard. So I don't have a typed up copy like Carlee does or anything, but she had a whiteboard in her house, and that's what we used. And then another one, I believe it was done in Area 9, and it was with a resource worker who did it with a provisional family. And it was around, they, had some children in their home and they weren't really sure if they could do this, like if they could keep the children or not. And ultimately doing the 3-column map led to the children, like they decided they needed the children moved from their home. But what it did is it allowed that family to make that decision for themselves and not let those children linger in a placement that is iffy and it goes back and forth. And then, they've been there for, 9 months later and we decide, oh, they need to be moved now after they've built this really strong bond and everything. So while it is, it's not the outcome that we wanted, obviously, but like I said, it allowed that family to make that decision that needed to be made. And it allowed those children, to not be in a placement where they didn't know like when it was going to end and all of that.
And also just like a little bit on the foster parents, like I know you guys, especially like, if we have a placement that's about to blow or like they've been there for a while and there's a lot of chaos in the home, like you guys can even bring that up to the worker and say, hey, like let's both of us go out and we can talk with the foster mom and we can just do this map and we can just have that open discussion and just really support her. Or I mean, you can do that when you're on the phone with this foster mom, if you're calling to check in on your kid, and you can really, you guys know, you can hear it in their voice when they're just like they're just so overwhelmed or there's just so much going on in the home, and you can use this for yourself and it really helps them really feel like we're actually listening, like we're actually asking them, tell me about it, instead of them being so afraid sometimes. And that's my experience with the resource, like they're afraid to say, I'm worried about this, or this is not going well and here's why. They're so scared to tell us that because they don't want us to take the kids out of their home. They just want to talk. And so this is that's kind of with Cassie's, with the 3-column map, like you might not have a huge plan of like what will happen, kind of like with my 3-column map with that case. It might just be like, what needs to happen next? Like mom needs some respite, or, it could be anything like, and so you can ask to do this with workers, or you can do it yourself on the phone. And then you can tell resource or the caseworker, like, hey, I did this with them and this is what they told me, just so you guys have that. So.
Some CASAs I feel like really struggle on forming that connection, and with the bio parents, they're more concentrated on the kids and what the kids need. And so I think this could be a really useful tool and just kind of opening up that sometimes uncomfortable dialogue for CASAs with bio parents. Do y'all have any, with the caseworkers, they're already so stretched thin, and it's hard to fathom that they have time to go in and spend, like what Carlee was saying, a really long time and having a really good home visit. Do y'all have some insight and plans on how that's gonna be doable?
Yeah, so I will say Carlee's was kind of a unique exception. Like the parents were very angry when she went out. So like it was very escalated. So it took some time to bring them down. Not all home visits are that way. So like mine that I did with the adoptive parent, it probably was 10 or 15 minutes. And, really, I know Pulaski has a lot going on. I helped in Pulaski. I carried foster care cases for a little while, a little over a year ago. So like, I know everything, especially in Pulaski, is stretched so thin. It's that way across the whole state, but Pulaski is kind of a different world. But really, like, we're supposed to see our kids, right? And our parents at least once a month. At least once a month, we are supposed to see them in person. And so, if you go in once a month, you're already there. What's it hurt to pull out, a 3-column map and sit down and do that with, the child or the parent for 10 or 15 minutes to kind of get an idea of what's going on. And it's a way to guide that conversation instead of just going in and kind of like, hey, how's it going? How's parent? Like just running through the checklist. And so I think the goal is that they would just do it when they're out there doing their normal home visit. Does that help, Celeste?
Yeah, and I also, like Cassie said, it was an interesting situation, and it was very, very heated at the very beginning of the home visit. And also I was training. So it was like, I wanted her to understand how to use solution-focused questions. So she made time to go out there with me and like mapped that so she could use it on her other cases. And so that's also why we did spend so much time. I do think it was a very much needed home visit just because of how much was going on in that home. But like Cassie said, you don't have to spend that long with families. And especially with most of the cases that you guys deal with, they are already in foster care. So like we're talking with families that for the most part, like have accepted the fact that their kids are in foster care, and you can sit down with them, even if it's like, if you plan out, like, you know, they're coming to the visit and you plan a few minutes before the visit that you check in with them and you just ask them even one part of the column, like what's working well with you today. And then you can follow up with them when you go out and see them next, or at the end of their visit. Like you don't have to spend that much time with them. And there's so many different ways that you can use it. And there's no really set rule on where to use it or how to use it or when to use it. It's just, I mean, that's why I love them so much, because you can use them whenever and however you want.
Y'all need like a 10-minute break. Celeste, do you think a break would be good?
I'm good, but I don't know about everybody else. Do you need a break? That's the question.
No, I'm good. I'm actually one of those people who likes to just push through things, but I do recognize that maybe not everybody. I mean, I'm good to push through if Carlee, if you're good, and then like people, I'm fine if they need to step away for a second and come back. Like that's totally fine.
I'll have another stopping place in maybe like 15 minutes. Maybe we can do a 5-minute break.
Hey, Carlee hates breaks.
Yeah, I'm like, let's keep pushing. But like Cassie said, I know there's a lot of people on there and not everyone's like that. So.
Yeah, we may have a good stopping point in about 15 minutes. I think I can get through this next section.
Probably stopping at the CAP framework, Cassie. Yeah. All
right. So the next overarching goal we're going to move into is the critical thinking. So I just want to do a brief overview, because so within the critical thinking, I talked about the structured decision-making tools and how we will be getting those. So that's going to be a ways out. And I know y'all don't see that side of things as much because it's truly like our assessments and CRIS that we do. But we really won't be rolling out even the safety and risk assessments until the fall of this year. So we're a ways out, but I do want to just kind of give you a high level overview so you kind of have a little bit of an understanding. So this is just the difference between a safety threat. We're changing safety factor to safety threat. So that'll be a transition. And then, so safety threat versus risk. So safety threat, that means there's a deer in the road. We need to take immediate action. If we don't do something, something is going to happen to this child, right? That's what it means if we have a safety threat. Whereas risk just means there's a potential that something could happen, you know, and when we look at risk, you know, we're looking at months out, you know, whether that's 6 to 12 or even, you know, further than that. Risk, there's just the potential that something could happen, but this child is not an immediate danger. And so like with risk, you know, we want to intervene on the front end to try to prevent, you know, it turning into a safety threat. But like if there's just risk, it's not going to rise to the level of like a removal or protection plan unless it were to transition into an actual safety threat where we needed to do something immediately. And so connecting safety and risk. So like I said, so when we do an investigation, we have a safety assessment right now. It's called, I think it's the health and safety assessment, but it'll just be the safety assessment in the future. And so that informs specifically what we're worried about. And then the risk assessment tells us how worried we need to be. So the risk assessment, you know, it's either low, moderate, high, or very high. And obviously the higher the risk level, you know, the more likely it is that there either already is a safety threat or there's going to be a safety threat. So we really want to get involved with those families that fall into that high, very high level. Even if there's not a safety threat yet, we want to make sure that we are getting them services so that it doesn't lead to that. And so that's what that risk assessment guides us to. And within the structured decision-making tools, something that I'm really excited about that we'll be getting is a risk reassessment. So that'll be used in in-home cases to monitor how that risk level is coming down. And it has I said, it's truly an assessment. So there's like things that the worker will go through and check, you know, like how has the parent been doing services? How are they, you know, towards reaching their behavioral change goals? And there's a lot of different options for them to choose from, and that guides them to that decision they need to make on, okay, like we're ready to close this case, or we need to keep this case open longer. And so with that, we will also be getting a risk reunification assessment. And I think that's what I'm most excited about, because I came from foster care and there really is no guidance, right, on when you're supposed to close a foster care case, right? It's just kind of when everybody decides, and there's not really a whole lot of consistency in how that decision's made. And so the risk reassessment will help guide, you know, staff in when it is time, you know, to move towards, you know, unsupervised visits or looking at child home placement. The risk reassessment will take into account even visitation. So how much, like there's an actual formula, like how many visits has the family missed? There, you know, it takes into account that percentage. You know, were they rescheduled? Were they not? All those things. So it takes into account, you know, it as a whole. It's not just looking at one side of the case. And like there are even certain ways, like how you answer questions, you may not even get to the part about visitation because we automatically know how you answered means we need to keep going with this case. And so I just hope that that will help with consistency in the decisions that are made in foster care cases. Do y'all have any questions about that? Because I know that's kind of confusing, and I know y'all don't see a whole lot of that side of it, any like our actual assessment piece. And like I said earlier, with that, we will also be doing away with CANs. So we will be getting a new case plan assessment tool that I think will be a lot more beneficial. To me, it already seems like it will be a lot more beneficial, so hopefully staff will buy into it. And I will say this has probably been the easiest part to get staff on board with. They're very much ready for new assessments, especially doing away with CANs. So here, you know, two key ideas. You know, safety is not merely the absence of danger, but safety is the presence of protection. You know, I'm sure y'all worked hard with families to have them take, you know, responsibility for their actions. But when you do, you don't necessarily feel any better about, you know, the child's safety. The parent may own up to it, but at the end of the day, like, really, have they changed their actions? Have they changed their behavior? So what we really need to do is focus on assessing that protective behavior and making sure those are present. And also looking at what, you know, protective behaviors have they had in the past. And then that way, when it's time to close, we are clear about how we are closing the case, you know, and it must be because the caregiver and the network has demonstrated actions of protection to mitigate the safety threats over time. So again, you know, this really hits back to the behavioral change piece. So we are not just looking for a parent to stop the behavior they were doing, right? We want to see that actual behavioral change and what is their action of protection that they're doing now to ensure the child's safety. And so this just kind of shows how SOP and SDM work together. SDM are our assessment tools, like I said, that we will use at key decision points. So safety and risk, you know, that's used on the front end when we have an investigation. And then case planning tool, obviously that'll be used, you know, when we get ready to develop the case plan, and then every 3 months, whenever we develop a new case plan, and then reunification assessment and risk assessment will be used depending on whether it's foster care or in-home. And then safety organized practice. So the skill, like a lot of the stuff we're talking about today, like the skills and principles within safety organized practice, that is what you actually use every day when you're working with families. And it's what really, you know, the tools within safety organized practice help us get a lot better information to do better quality assessments, so that when we go to do that risk reassessment, we are putting in accurate information to lead us to, you know, the best decision possible for that family. And that's where SOP comes in. Are there any questions on that? All right, Carlee.
You want me to keep on going, or are we doing break?
Yeah, I think we can go. I think you might be able to get through at least most of this.
Okay. Okay, so moving into another tool that we have, it's called the CAP framework. So, and that is an acronym for Collaborative Assessment and Planning Framework. So this is an overview of the Collaborative Assessment and Planning Framework, and it's used for the consultation of information sharing. So when we say consultation, that means it helps us serve an organization in analyzing functions when we do those consultations. So informational sharing refers to using what we have learned here to help pass on information to others in our own system and other systems, and back and forth with the family and the network. So some agencies have added these categories to their computer systems, actually, and for an individual worker to enter. So many of us, when you're thinking about that, it is best used on a whiteboard or a large piece of paper with the group participating, and it captures the best critical thinking and supports a group in coming to shared understanding of a family in a situation. So like, this is the same thing, like you can do it any other way, like some jurisdictions have it, on the computer where they can do it. You can do it on a whiteboard, you can do it on a piece of paper, you can type it. And so I've actually done it even on a Zoom, and I've presented while someone was asking me the questions. So we've done it that way as well. And so it's just whatever the situation may be. And there's no wrong or right way to do it. This is kind of, so as you can see, there's the what are we worried about, what's going well, and what needs to happen next. So we have those 3 questions on the CAP framework. And so this is just a more detailed version of the 3-column map. So, and that's how I explain it anyway. Cassie, you might have more to say about it, but I like to think about, if you do the 3-column map, you can transition into doing the CAP framework because it gives you more information. And the 3-column map, isn't as detailed as the CAP framework.
Yeah, I also just want to add that it breaks down the information too into like further categories. So like, for example, here we have the what are we worried about column. So we have the harm and danger, and then we have complicating factors. So harm and danger, that's going to be, when I talked about caregiver behavior impact earlier, right? So those are going to be your things that really have whatever the caregiver is doing that has a significant impact on the child. And then, so the harm part is going to be what already happened. So why were we involved? Why did we open this case? That sort of things, that statement would go there. And then the danger piece is really that, like, what is this parent continuing to do that is a danger to this child that has significant impact on them? Whereas complicating factors are more of just, maybe some risk factors that the family has that don't necessarily, have a significant impact on the child. But, we want to be mindful of those that they could turn into, potentially a safety threat.
I do feel like across the state, we get kind of, because with training across the state, I think that we do get hung up in the complicating factors section. I think that it's hard sometimes for workers to be able to put where harm and danger goes and where the complicating factors are. That's one of my favorite things of this whole thing, or this whole tool, is for them to be able to really think about where things go and just not getting caught up in those complicating factors. Do you have anything else, Cassie?
Yeah, I'll just go a little bit further. So like the what is going well, it's the same concept, right? So you have safety and permanency / belonging. So that's going to be, what is the parent doing that has a positive, like, what is their behavior that truly has a positive impact on the child that is significant? And then the strengths and resources section, that's going to be like services they're working on, or, they have transportation. Those sorts of things will go in that strengths and resources section. And another thing that I like about the CAP framework as well is so it has, really this should be done either, like between a supervisor and a worker, or, you know, in a group setting. It should not be one person sitting down to do it by themselves. So I love that it has the purpose of the consultation. Like, why are we here meeting, right? Is it because we potentially have a placement disruption, those sorts of things? And then it takes into account the support network that the family has. So we need to list all those people and any cultural considerations. And then obviously, eventually we'll get to where we would list the SDM guidance. So that's whether, you know, the family is safe, safe with the plan, or unsafe, which means the child would be in foster care. And then it also leaves a section for gray areas. So like maybe you're in the middle of a consultation or staffing and you're doing one of these and some questions come up that y'all don't have the answers to. So that's a place for you to write those questions down so that you can follow up with the family later. And then obviously the like what needs to happen next. So we'll talk more about worry statements and goal statements here in a little bit, but then it also has your action steps. And so you just list those out on the, you know, paper, like this is what everybody's gonna do next. And those are really meant to be small things. So we're not talking like action step, parents stop using drugs, you know, like that's not realistic, right? We want very small things. So we talked about the scaling question earlier, right? Like on 0 to 10, 0 is unsafe, 10 is, you know, we're ready to close. Well, if the family, say we're at this meeting, we do the scaling question and somebody says they're a 4. So we ask them, what will move you up by 1? Just 1. We're not asking that family to jump to a 10 right then, right? That's not practical. And families need to feel like they can take small steps so that they're not overwhelmed. And so that's what you do. And you just go around and you ask everybody in that meeting, what will move you up by 1? And that automatically pretty much just creates your action steps for what people need to do until you, you know, designate to meet the next time.
And this is like the 3-column map. Sometimes the what's going well is short, and that's okay. As long as we have something there, and as long as we have something in the strengths and resources, that's fine. But like if you do this right when a child comes into foster care, it's going to be small because obviously we didn't have a lot that was going well because the children are in foster care. So when I first started doing this, I did try to I kind of got stuck there because I'm like, I've got to pull more positives. They have to have more things. And sometimes like, it's okay if it's short, like as long as you have something.
Yeah, and that's why we're involved, right? Like we want to help these families build safety. So when we first get involved with the family, like Carlee said, there may not be as much there because that's our job, is to help them learn those actions of protection and build that safety over time. So the goal is that that column would increase the longer we're involved with them.
Do you think we can go on?
Yeah.
Cassie. Okay. So, Sherita, I mean, and this is just up to you, Cassie, but I think we really covered this like in the last slide. Like, I feel like it's just kind of, we broke all the spots down. I don't know if you have anything else to talk about here, but you covered all of that. So just kind of going into the CAP framework, we have some examples. So we do have one on the participant guide, that is Cheryls Story, that if I can pull that up, you guys will give me just a second. I can pull that up and show you. I just have to find it here. It is on page 12 of your participant manual. If you guys have it, I think it was dropped in chat. Okay, here it is. So just a second, moving stuff around. So also, I did forget to tell you guys, hold on, I don't know what you guys are seeing. What are you guys seeing? Can you tell me?
It was there a minute ago.
Yeah, you had it.
Okay, it moved on me. Okay, so when talking about Cheryls Story, we talked about her earlier, and this is an example of what her CAP framework looked like. And we have it all organized here of where the harm and danger were. So, and we even put in here the past harm. So that was when she reported years ago that the girl's father was violent. And so that's in there. And so then we have the complicating factors. So the complicating factors are that she lost her job, The father wasn't violent. And so Cheryl was living with an aunt as a child. So that's a complicating factor. And then the hospital reported that Cheryl has a history of mental illness. So we have that the girls have not seen their dad in more than 2 years, and that John has not been found and has not returned any calls to the caseworker. So some of those things, like when doing these CAP frameworks, like some of them try to land here. So that's kind of what I was saying earlier. It's a great example. And I said at the very beginning of the training, I'm a visual learner. So I love these examples. That way we can, I can go and look at this and kind of try to help workers as well. So you guys have this resource too, to keep with you and to reference back to it. And we have Cheryl's story. And so as Cassie was saying about the gray areas, so we talk about how she's active in her church. You know, I wonder if her safety, that could be part of her safety network that we can pull from. Are there relatives that we need to explore? Did medication help Cheryl in the past, and what was she on, and how can it help now? On the cultural considerations, we talk about how Cheryl is a member of the Catholic Church, and she attends that regularly, and the family is Black. So all of those things are very important in looking at this family and building from that. And if these children are in foster care, what is the culture of their foster home? And so especially like sometimes we have, like, it's hard to put stuff in the cultural considerations with certain families, and we have to pull on something, and religion is one that you can put in there if you don't think that you have anything to put there, just because a lot of times, like, you know, that can be a big deal in foster homes. You know, if this mom is a member of the Catholic Church and the family is Baptist and they're going to that church, it can cause issues with the foster children. And I've seen that so many times as a resource worker. We couldn't figure out what was going on, and it ended up being a religion issue. And so that's something that it's very important to put there. And so we have over here, we have one thing. So like I said earlier, it doesn't have to be a big long list of what's going well. And then we do have some strengths and resources. And we put here on the strengths resources about the family doctor in the school having no concerns with mom or how she was parenting. And mom has a lot of strengths, and we kind of talked about that earlier. But going down, you can see our action steps, because we are still kind of struggling about when we're developing those action steps with workers. We're still getting stuck when doing this on, like Cassie made the example of, mom will be sober. Or, which I know this isn't a drug case, but I hear that a lot with the drugs, like mom won't use. Like, that is so unrealistic. And we cannot tell them that, because they're going to use, they're going to relapse. Like, it's a roller coaster when you're working a case, and so we can't have that expectation. So here it's a little goal. She agrees to not be around the children by herself at this time. So she can be around the kids, she can't be around them by herself. Or Cheryl agrees to meet with Betsy, the coach from CPS. So she's agreeing to meet with her. It doesn't say how many times, it doesn't say, you know, when, it just says, I'll meet with her. So it's those small little goals that Cassie was saying earlier that we put in there for them to be able to meet. Do you have anything to say about this, Cassie?
All that I can think of.
Okay. And so really quickly, I do have one just to kind of give you guys an example. I have one from Arkansas for you guys to see. So it's more relatable. So this is one that I actually did over Zoom, and we've done it 3 times because I've known the family since I was a caseworker, and I've really struggled, being honest. I was in the state of, how am I supposed to put action steps here? And we did it 3 times. And on the 3rd time, I'm finally happy with it. And I think that speaks volumes in being in the space of workers and having, you know, sometimes cases are so bad or so complicated that you do get stuck in the what are we worried about column. And so for me, I'm able to help the workers in this case and be able to help them and maybe coach them and guide them more when I have a CAP framework, because it puts my mind, okay, what are we going towards? And that's these action steps. And so this case is really complicated, lots of stuff going on. But on the gray areas, we have that there's is there income in the home? We're not really sure, at the time of removal, if there was income in the home. What is the drug issues in the home? There was a lot of back and forth of what was going on there. And then we were talking about, they'd been in foster care before, so can we reach back out to the resource parents that had them before and see if they could be a safety network for the family? So those were all questions that we had when we were doing this. We put in the cultural considerations that it was a large family with a history of DCFS intervention. These grandparents had these kids, and the grandparents actually lost custody of their biological children. And so now these grandkids are in foster care, and these kids have also been in foster care with mom twice. So there's a long history of that. And so that is something that you have to consider when working with this family, as well as it is a small town. So sometimes it's limited resources when you have those small towns, as well as it is a white family. When going down, just really quickly showing you some of the action steps, just because it is overwhelmed. And like before we did this CAP framework, if you ask the worker, like, what's your plan? Like, she doesn't have one, because it's frustrating that these kids are back in foster care, right? They've been in care almost all of their life. And so here's an action step. DCFS is going to explore ICPC and other relatives. Like, that's something that we can do. And that's something that we should be doing. There's another one that, so this one, the caregiver agrees that children will always be cared for by a safe and sober adult who ensures they have no contact with drugs or paraphernalia. Family time will be scheduled to allow grandparents to demonstrate this act of protection over time. So that is an action step that, we've been using a lot, but this is just an example of just a different case of how your action steps can look. So does anyone have any questions about the CAP framework now that we've saw two? Okay, so Cassie, do you want to do the breakout room?
No, I don't think we have time.
Yeah, okay. Well then, I guess I'm done about the CAP framework if no one has any questions.
Celeste, do you want to take a break or power through?
Yeah, let's just do like a quick 5-minute break.
Sounds good.
Thank y'all.
All right, so we'll go ahead and get started again. So these are just some basic terms. We've kind of already touched on them, but just a reminder. So when we talk about harm, that's anything that's happened in the past. So that could even be previous history. And we talk about safety threat, that's present. So what's going on immediately right now. And then risk is what we're worried about happening in the future if nothing changes. And then if you go on to the next one, Sherita. So this is just a quick reminder. Services do not equal safety. Safety and services are not the same thing. Services are a means to an end, but that end is safety. And so like, you know, a parent can set in parenting classes for, 12 weeks, but if they don't put what they learn into action, that doesn't necessarily matter. So, even though they completed that service, that doesn't mean that it ultimately equaled safety. So, it can be very hard to determine if safety is occurring. It's definitely harder than, determining if that parent completed services or not, but it's much more meaningful for us to look at that safety piece rather than, just looking at that services. And the goal is that the services will build a bridge over time. I think we can go ahead and go on to the next one because I pretty much touched on this earlier in the CAP framework. That's just talking about moving up by one.
So when talking about harm, worry, and goal statements, when talking about each one, so like the worry statements is what are we worried about that's going to happen next. The harm is what has already happened, and our goal is what we hope happens instead. So when talking about these, we need to consider the connections between all these statements, and we can think of a reason for referring or condensing what we know about what has already happened that brought the child into the agency's attention, and to look to the past. And we don't really know what the future holds, so we can sort the future statements into risk statements, which is what we will worry will happen if nothing changes. And the goal statements it's going to be the opposite of what our worry statement is. So the reason for the referral would be the past harm. So that would be essentially why DHS actually got involved with the family. And the worry statements explain why we actually stay involved. So sometimes we can respond to a report or when we see a family once and then close the case, but we don't always stay involved. So what causes the agency to stay involved is a worry that the child will be harmed in the near future. So the worry statement describes what we worry what is our worry if DHS goes away. And our goal statements create that vision of what it will look like when DCFS can go away. It gives us a picture for what the family works towards. So when talking about these a little bit, I did actually see I have 2 Area 5 classes on here. So I have been involved in a couple of removal consultations, and they're actually using harm, worry, goal statements in that. So you guys can you can use it really anywhere, but I just love seeing it actually being out in the field. And so they are using those in those removal consultations and a lot of other areas. But, when they do the removal consultations, they're asking, what is our goal for these kids or this child now that they're in foster care? And it gets workers to really think like, what is our goal for these certain kids? So I do have something in the chat saying that someone's having trouble hearing. And so I want to make sure that it's not my audio or if it's their audio. Can everyone hear me?
I can hear you okay.
Okay.
My audio is good.
Okay, so if you're having problems hearing, I know a lot of times with Zoom, which is so annoying, but if you'll log out and log back in, it normally fixes the audio issue, which sounds so crazy, but it normally works. If you want to try to do that, it might help. But anyway, So going forward, so that's just an example of, where Area 5 that I've seen firsthand of where Area 5 is using harm warning goal statements. You can use these, with supervisors, just talking with your staff, like, asking them to craft those statements, and it really helps them sit down and really think about the case and like what they're talking about, and not getting caught up in those complicating factors that we talked about earlier in the CAP framework. So Cassie, do you have anything about all of those before I go into all of them?
I just want to say that it really keeps us focused on the safety of the child. That's why we're there. And so these are supposed to be clear statements that the family understands, and that ideally even the child understands. And so we want to write them in family-friendly language. The goal is for all of our cases to have these. It doesn't necessarily apply to every single case. Most cases will have them though, especially if it's foster care. And so, we want those to be the key points in staffings, right? Like, we know this is the worry statement. We know these are the goal statements. So what are we doing to address both of those? And that can keep a clear focus, like when we're in a meeting with a family, like this is what everybody's talking about and what everybody's worried about.
So we're going to talk about each one. And so the first one we're going to address is the harm statements. So these provide clear, specific statements about harm or maltreatment that has happened to the child. So we're giving those details. We're taking our judgment out and just stating the facts. So how you craft those harm statements is you say it was reported, and then you give more details, and then you talk about what caregivers' actions or inactions were, and then you talk about how you're impacting the child. And you hear that a lot. We say, what is the impact of the child so much? Just because that's why we're here. We're looking at families of like how that impacts the child. So that's how you craft the harm statements. And then we're going to talk about this example so you guys can see an actual one that is formed. So this is about Cheryl. So this example, it says, it was reported that on September 17th, Cheryl Turner turned on the gas of her home stove and locked herself in the kitchen, exposing both the kitchen and the rest of the apartment to high levels of toxic fumes. Cheryl's 2 children, who were home at the time, were exposed to the fumes and lost consciousness. So we have that it was, we have who it was reported. We talk about the caregiver of what they did, and then how it was impacting the children. So when going into worry statements, these are the behavioral statements of the specific worry that we have about this child now and for the future. So when crafting those, we have the child or the children that we may be talking about, impacted, how they were impacted, and if and when, and talking about the context of that. So this creates, a statement to where we know exactly what we're worried about. So when talking about the 2 questions about the worry statements, we ask, what is the agency most worried will happen if the child if nothing changes, and when or in what context are they most worried this could happen? So it's important to make that distinction of each question when you're crafting the worry statements. So giving an example of the worry statement. So Adam may be physically injured, hit, hurt, left with bruises or more serious injuries when his dad, Matt, drinks alcohol and becomes angry and hits him. So we're telling who the child is. We're concerned about all of his impacts and who we're talking about. So when talking about that and on the worry statements, do you guys have any questions about that? I know I'm kind of going through it fast, but we still have so much to cover.
I just want to jump in really quick, Carlee. Yeah. So back on like the 2 questions that are answered by worry statements. So this is not meant to be like, what is the worst that could happen if the child remains in the parent caregiver's care? it's a different distinction. This specifically names what we are worried that parent is going to do, very specific in the context that it happens in. And so, most parents do not hurt their children 100% of the time. There are some exceptions to that, but for the most part, it's not happening 100% of the time. There is a very specific context of when this happens, so Sherita, if you want to go ahead and move on to the next example, like when we're talking about Adam here, like he may be physically injured, hit, hurt, left with bruises when his dad drinks alcohol. So we are worried about that happening when his dad drinks alcohol. If his dad's not drinking alcohol and that's not happening, then that's not a worry, right? We are specifically worried about it in that context. And one thing I really want to point out, like with the worry statements and the goal statements specifically, we always start those with the child's name, because at the end of the day, we are here for the child and we want to keep them at the center of our focus. And so those will always start with that child so that everybody can be reminded, like, this is who we're here for, and we want to ensure their safety. Sorry, Sherita, you can go on to the next. So there are 3 types of worry statements. There's the safety and danger focus, permanency focus, and then well-being focus. Safety and danger, ideally we want to create those on every open case. Like obviously there's a reason why we're involved, so we need to, address that safety. And then permanency focus, we're going to create those whenever we bring a child into care or we're considering bringing a child into care. And that, those statements really are meant to be like, they tell the community about our worries if we bring the children into care. And they also remind us, like, children are negatively impacted a lot of times when we bring them into care. Yes, we are trying to keep them safe, but we all know that whenever a child comes into foster care, it's very traumatic for them. So this shows the family that we are recognizing that, and also keeping in mind that, this child is hurting because they are separated from their parent. And then well-being focused worry statements, and those, are created if well-being concerns negatively impact the child. So we may not have those on every case. A lot of times we will have those more with like older youth who maybe are struggling like with school. So a lot of those are going to be more like education focused, or maybe like environmental or hygiene, those different types of scenarios that not necessarily doesn't rise to a safety threat, but like we're worried enough, we need to name it up and, create a goal statement to work on it. And then these are sorry, go back, Sherita. You're a little ahead of me. So these are the worry statements for Cheryl's family. And it says, so there's 2 safety ones and then 1 permanency. So the first safety, Amanda and Lisa could be seriously physically hurt if Cheryl were to become depressed, not ask for help, and try to hurt herself while the girls are with her. And then Amanda and Lisa could be emotionally hurt, scared, shocked, traumatized if Cheryl were to hurt herself and they were to find her. And then permanency focus, Amanda and Lisa could be emotionally or socially hurt, scared, confused, miss their mom and each other when they are separated from their mother and living outside the home. So again, you see how that, it names the child, impacted how, and then the specific context that we are worried about them that happening in. So, with Cheryl, everybody said they were shocked, she was a great parent most of the time, but if she becomes depressed and doesn't ask for help, then her children almost died because of that, right? So that's that specific context that we want to name up. Okay, sorry, we can move on to goal statements now. You're on mute, Carlee.
Yeah, I noticed that as soon as I started. So goal statement. So we've talked about the past harm. So the reason why we have a referral, and we've talked about worry statements, which is why DCFS is involved with the family. So now we can go into talking about goal statements. And so we have the risk statement, which is like our starting line. And then the goal statement would be where we want to be and where our finish line is. So when talking about the what of enhancing safety, so in order for a family to be successful, we need to be clear that they understand what needs to be done differently to ensure that their children are safe. And so I feel like a lot of times we just give them a list of things to do. And that's what we were talking about before, of talking about saying, and talking more about, sorry, I lost my train of thought, but Cassie, help me.
So this is really like where we're talking about like getting at that behavioral change.
Yes.
Right. Because our families, we a lot of times just give them a list of services. This is what we expect you to complete. But then they don't understand when they've completed all their services and haven't made a behavioral change, why we won't just give them their child back, right? So this is meant to clearly name up what we need to see them do differently so that we can return the child. It's not a service. It is a specific statement on this is the behavior that you are going to do.
And this will help. Thank you. I've just lost my train of thought. Good grief. But this will help us, like I had said earlier, you know, when I was a caseworker and we would just give them that list of services, and then I would be frustrated when we would get to that point and I would say, you know, there's been no change. Like this will help that. And I don't know if you guys are familiar with, if you've heard workers say that. I know I still hear that a lot out in the field when I'm talking with workers. So this is going to be something that we'll be able to change that. We can talk about, well, what is your goal statement for the family? When going into talking about what is actually how to craft a goal statement, we need to have those clear, simple statements about what the caregiver will do that will convince everyone that the child is actually safe and will be safe in the future. So we'll have, first, we're talking about who. So who began with, and then went into who is worried. So now we will use like the names of the people or who are part of the safe support network. Sorry, that was really essentially talking about the child. So then you move into a safety goal describes about what the parent is going to be doing differently. So what is going to be done differently? So it's extremely important to craft this part of the safety goal in terms of actions of protection the caregiver will demonstrate to mitigate that danger. And I know that there's an example, but before we do the example, Cassie, do you have anything else to say about the goal statements?
Just that these are not meant to be. So we're not saying like the parent's not going to use drugs. That's not what a goal statement is. It's more of like, what is the action that they're actually going to do? So let's say, you know, the child, will not, if the parent feels like using, they're not going to be left home alone by themselves. And the parent will always ask for somebody to like come take care of them. They're going to reach out to their support network to care for that child if they feel like using, instead of just not using drugs, right? Because that's not very practical when we're talking about substance abuse and relapse. A lot of times parents do relapse, but what we want them to do is make that behavioral change to where if they do feel like they're going to use, they're going to contact that person to come care for their child. They're going to reach out to somebody. So, the child will always be cared for by a safe and sober adult. And so will reach out for help if they feel like using. So those sorts of goals, rather than just saying, they're not going to use drugs. Or for Cheryl, it's not just Cheryl's going to take her medication and go to therapy. Yes, those are great things and they can help lead us there. But at the end of the day, if she's feeling depressed, she needs to ask for help, right? That's what she needs to do. And that's what's going to help ensure her children are safe. So you can go ahead and move on to the example, Sherita.
So giving you an example of a goal statement, we're going to be talking back to Cheryls Story. So Amanda and Lisa will be cared for by a caregiver who will always ask for help if sadness or depression starts to get in the way of taking care of the girls, or the caregiver starts to think about hurting herself. So we must boil the goal statements down that what actually has to happen to close the case. So if Cheryl would have asked for help, she may never turn on the gas, or at minimum, she may have ensured her children were not home when she actually did. So as you can see, this goal statement would have solved the issue of why the kids originally came into foster care.
And then just linking the goal statements and worry statements really quickly, like, once we have a balanced assessment of strengths and needs, you and the caregiver, or, the worker and the caregiver, or as a team, you can develop relevant goal statements that relate to the harm and worry statement. So the goal statements really are meant to mirror what your worry statements are. So you may have a couple of goal statements. And then so connecting the goal and the plan. So for example, like the goal statement is the finish line, right? Like it's the end zone if you're talking about football. Like it's the goal we want to get to. Whereas this case plan or like safety plan, that is the guide of how to get us there, right? So that is going to include some services, because as we talked about earlier, like services can help build that bridge to safety. So they can help the parents' behavioral change over time. But we still really, at the end of the day, our bottom line, right, is that goal statement for us to be able to either reunify or close a case. So that's what we have to see the parent doing. So I don't know if y'all have any questions about that, if that makes sense. But like I said, goal statements, the finish line or the end zone, and then the case plan is going to be how we get to that goal statement or finish line. All right, Carlee, I'll let you take it over because I know this is going to be your favorite. This is your favorite section.
I'm already smiling, and I feel like you guys are going to love this too, just because I do know that you guys work with our foster kids, and that is like one of your main focuses. And so I absolutely love this part of SOP, and all of my coworkers know that. All the staff in my office, I'm housed here, know that. But I love it because even though I was in, crisis mode when I first started with the department, I just always felt like we have to be doing more for these kids, but I was running so fast that I didn't know how to do more for them. And their voice matters, right? They're seeing all of that trauma that's going on in their home, or they're feeling all of that. And we ask them like, how's it going? But like, we don't actually sit down and like, let them tell their story. And so that's why I love this so much. And so, it starts off with my very favorite tool. And I've done this so many times. And once you do it multiple times, you guys will soon to love it too. Sometimes it doesn't always work. You don't always get this huge outcome of what you're wanting it to be. But at the same time, you can, even if you don't feel like it's successful, like I've called Cassie so many times and I'm like, I didn't get what I wanted. But then after talking about it, you think, oh, well, they didn't tell me that, but they also drew this. And so we kind of know that might be an issue later that you can come back to. So this tool is the 3 houses, and you guys can do this with all of the kids, that you're assigned to. You can do it with the caseworkers. You can ask the caseworker if they've done it with these kids, if you guys are having an issue with a case, or even if you just want to get to know the kids that you're assigned to. That's why I love it. Like, you don't have to have a specific problem. You can just do it to just spend time with them. And it doesn't have to take a long time. Or if you know it's going to be a high risk case, or that this case has got a lot going on, like, make sure you have that time to spend with those kids, because they might be in the middle of telling you something that you might not be able to go to that next visit that you have scheduled, because you can just spend time with these kids. And most of the time when you plan on doing this, you're going to kind of know like what the outcome of what you're wanting to do that you get. But so the first house is called the House of Worries. And so this house is basically the 3 houses is the same as the 3-column map, only it's crafted to meet kids' needs and to be able to where we can get the child's voice and actually tell us what they're actually worried about in their home, or what they're actually worried about if they go home to their biological family, or if there's a lot of problems happening in the foster home. Like, this is a chance for them to tell us what they're actually worried about. And the same with the good things, like what are their favorite things in their home, or what are their things that they loved in their home, or that they love in their foster home. And then we have the House of Hopes and Dreams. So that's essentially like the question in the 3-column map of what needs to happen next in the kid version. Cassie, you want to say something?
Yeah, I was just gonna add, and so like the House of Hopes and Dreams is really meant to build on the House of Worries and not the House of Good Things. So the House of Hopes and Dreams, we want that to be like, what would your house look like if we took all of your worries away? If we were to pull all of those out, what would be happening in your house? So that's just something to keep in mind with the tool.
So I'm going to share a few things. So just like all the other tools, there's no absolutely set way to do things. I like to just take blank pieces of paper and just let them go. And because I don't want to limit them to like a small piece of paper or a small template. Like we do have fillable tools on like our DHS share that workers have access to, but they don't have to use those. Like if you're out and you think, oh my gosh, I should have brought my stuff for a 3-column map, you don't have to have your stuff. I know that Heather Meitner with Evident Change tells a story, and I love it, that the worker was out in a home and she was wishing that she had paper. She didn't have paper. She didn't have a pen. She didn't have crayons. It was like one of those things where she was just like, I need to stop by this house. And she didn't have like her normal things. And the family was very limited on resources in the home. So they didn't have anything for her to use. So she used Legos. The kid had lots of Legos and they built his house of worries, his house of good things, and his house of hopes and dreams. And then she just took pictures of it. And so you can do this anyway. It just gives you that time with these kids that they deserve, that we all know that they deserve to be able to tell their story. And so I'm going to share a few things. So I have a worker here in the county that I'm housed in that created this. And so she likes to use this when she's doing her 3 houses. I don't know if you guys can see that, right? So this is just a cute little thing that she filled out. She is a newer worker, but she's tried it with her biological son that she has in her home. And she's found out that he is having bad dreams of people coming into his room at night. And so she didn't realize why he was having nightmares, and that like just with her own biological child, she was able to find that out. And so she likes this form and she made this herself. And that's just, like I said, everyone's different. Like you don't have to use this, but this is just a cute way of like how she made it. But I am going to show you a 3 house that I did. And so, but like I said, not every 3 house is going to be that successful, that if you're looking to get a disclosure out of a child, like you're not always going to get this. But I did do a 3 houses with a family. And I'm trying to get it up here. So we have, can you guys see that? So this is just a little background between these 2 kids. They're twins, and I actually interviewed them together. They live in like on the same property, but the bio mom has a different home, and then there's the grandparents' home, but they're all very close together. So I ended up doing 2 different houses at the same time because it was confusing when I was talking to the kids. I didn't know which home that they were talking about. So, and it was really hard for them to talk to me. They were very nervous, and they started saying like, I don't knows. And they were, keeping being very silent when I was asking questions. And then finally we started talking about what they saw my job as, and we got into superheroes. And there's a boy and a girl, and so I talked about how superheroes, their job is to save the world, and DCFS jobs, or anyone that is working with them in their home, our job is to make sure that they're safe. And so we can't fully do our job and making sure that they're safe, or that their family needs help, and for us to help families and to help people if we don't know actually what's going on. And so when I said that, like you could almost see like their eyes twinkle, and they're like, oh my gosh, this is so much fun, like to think about it like that. And so then they really were able to tell me answers of my questions. But starting off, they did not want to draw, they didn't want to write, they just wanted me to do it. So that's fine. So I did some of it, but you can kind kind of see the handwriting changes. And, you know, I was in a hurry. This was fast. There was a lot of stuff going on in this home. So you can so apologize for my handwriting, but it's what I had at the time. And so Blue House is bio mom. And so they, you know, their likes, and as you could, it doesn't say good things, it says likes, because all kids, you know, they might want to change it to all different kinds of things. So, and you just kind of go with it as long as it means the same thing as good. It doesn't have to be the house of good things. But they like their cat, they love playing outside, they love fidgets, they like to paint with mom and dad. In this assessment, they talked about how much they associated foster care with the Blue House, and they talked about how they missed our playroom at the DHS office and that they loved their toys there. And then we go into Grandma's house, and some of their likes is, you know, they like to water plants with Grandma, and they love spending time with Grandpa. They said that Grandma's house is safe because DHS says so, and that they like that they know that that home is safe at the time. And so going into the worries and fears. So in the Blue House, you know, the kids, you know, told me little things like they were afraid of spiders. The little boy says, I'm not afraid of anything, you know, normal kid things. And then they started telling me that mom hears voices, that she falls asleep a lot, and they don't ever wake her up because they just need to play, and that they do stuff in the living room sometimes. And so I asked them like what stuff meant. And of course, you know, they giggled and they wouldn't tell me. So I kind of moved on a little bit. And then they told me that they're worried to tell me the truth. And so we went back to the superhero analogy of talking about how, you know, I can't help if I don't know what's going on, and that whole conversation. And then it led us into, they told me that their mom and dad come out of the room and there's blood everywhere. There's blood on their hands, face, and arms. Their mom's sleepy a lot, and DHS is bad because we can't be at the Blue House. So then I went back up and asked, you know, what is the stuff? Like, what are we talking about? And then they wanted to draw. And so these kids, when I was watching them, it was fun for them to draw this because this is their life. I mean, they were excited to draw. They were feeding off of each other of saying, oh, you know, don't forget that the spoon that mom likes to use with the black on the bottom. This is their life, and you can see that like when you're doing this with them, like I just let them be kids. I mean, it was fun. Like I said, it was fun for them to draw this, and it's so sad to think that this was fun for them to draw, but this is their story, and this is how their life is, and this is what they've saw. So, you know, they told me that mom puts this little black thing around her arm and sticks this thing that's called a syringe. So they actually said syringe. So they told me it was something that you use at a doctor's office, and they couldn't remember the name. And I just kind of waited in silence for them to tell me. And then they said syringe. So they know that it's called that. They told me that after mom and dad do this stuff, they fall out on the bed. And so then they both act out like how they fall out on the bed, and they just pass out with the black things still around their arms. And that's what this little box down here at the bottom of their drawing is. Mom and dad passed out. And so obviously, you know, and I asked things like how long, you know, because they had been in foster care before. So you ask like, where, you know, how recent has this happened? How often do they do this? And, you know, they told me it was almost daily, sometimes multiple times. School had just started. It was like at the beginning of September when I did this. And so they said that they'd been over there like within the week time of school starting. And so it was a pretty recent deal. This isn't talking about past trauma. And that's how I was able to tell that it was current going on. And so when we go into, and this was their worry and fear for the Blue House, which is mom's. And when we go into the worries with Grandma's house, you know, they tell me again, there's spiders everywhere and sometimes ants. But then they say, they're worried because they have to lie about where they're at, because if not, they'll get taken away. And so that's a worry and fear that they have in grandma's home. And they specifically told me that. And so that's something for us to know what's going on in the home at grandma's house and what grandma is telling them. And then we got to the hopes and dreams of the Blue House. And so they tell me that they wish their daddy was home more, but he stays a lot with his mom. And then they said that they wanted to have a house to where they don't have to hide from DHS when someone knocks at the door. Even when, so they tell me that, that they have to hide in the laundry room anytime someone knocks on the door. Even when, like the light man came, they thought it was DHS, so they had to hide, and they don't want to have to hide anymore. And they wish that both homes were considered safe, and that they think grandma's house is safe, but they want the Blue House to be safe. And so after doing all of that, like this, you know, when they drew this, it was a lot for them. And so we did not get to the house of hopes and dreams for grandma because they were very anxious at this point. And there was a lot of stuff going on in the home outside the door when I was with them. And so we actually didn't finish the house of hopes and dreams with grandma's house. But I've also done this, and I actually don't have it as an example, but I've done this with a pre-adoptive child, of talking about like what her hopes and dreams for a potential pre-adoptive family were and what she was worried about. It made us realize that she was still really worried about things that happened when she very first came into care, and the child was up for adoption for quite some time. And that was something we were able to address with her therapist before she got adopted. And like, you know, these kids, they said, you know, spiders were a fear, but they told me a lot of things that were very, very, you know, useful and obviously very concerning. And, you know, in my pre-adoptive child, she talked about how, you know, she wanted a home that had an Alexa in it, I think she said she wanted to be on a farm with animals. So that's all cute things. But then she tells me that she doesn't want to be in a home with a brother that's older than her. And that's because of past trauma, and that trauma that we felt like she had already addressed in years of therapy that's still very, very there. And so that adoption specialist was able to connect with her and talk with her therapist about that. And so those are two different things. But that one that I shared with you is a lot. So I don't know if there's any questions or if you have any comments about it, or I kind of honestly really want to know like how you guys are feeling about the 3 houses, just because I know you guys do talk with our kids a lot. So what are you guys thinking?
So I really like it, and I like the concepts behind it. I think for CASA advocates, we would have to be careful because we're not investigating what leads children into care. We are looking at best interests after they are already in care. So we have to be careful trying to solicit any disclosures on anything on how we go about that. So we probably have to be careful how we use some of it and do it in conjunction. But I can see it for lots of other things. I mean, like you could use it like if they have worries about school, you could convert it to 3 classrooms, you know, your classroom of worries, your classroom of good things and hopes and dreams. And, you know, you could convert it to lots of good things. So I like that. I know that, you know, at least in the scenario you just described, there was some disclosure going on there, and we would have to be careful.
Yes. And honestly, when we went out, like we weren't expecting that. Like it was just it was a PS case, yes, but it was just a home visit, and like we knew it's a weird situation of being on the same property, and so we knew that there were some things going on, but then you can kind of tell like that they were needing to get that out. And so, but like with my pre-adoptive child, like it wasn't something, she didn't disclose anything that we didn't already know, but she did, I forgot to say that she had a failed adoption. And so we're like, we've had one failed adoption. We've been up for adoption for a while. She's fairly young. So how can we try to meet the needs for her next home? And that was a way for her to get to tell her story. And potentially, I don't think that they did use this, but if she draws all those things, like that's something we can share with the adoptive home. Like, hey, this is what she drew. Like, and I know that there's several stories of that, of using it for adoptions, but it can be used in so many different things. And that kind of brings me into the next tool about the child's voice. But before we go into that really quick, the 3 houses doesn't necessarily have to be used with children, because we have so many families that are low functioning that it can also be a really great tool to use with those families that are not on the same level as what you would think an average adult would be on. So because it is broken down. And so you can talk it out with them too, like, and using the houses as a visual for them to tell you that. You can even have them draw it. It depends on where your parents are that you're talking with, what level they're on, but it's a really great tool to use with those types of families as well. But going into the safety house tool, I love this tool, and I love to use it when the children are going home on trial home placement. You can use it in so many different situations. If we put in a protection plan, if we do all of that, but my brain goes to that just because of casework and my fear as a casework saying, oh gosh, like these kids are going home and I hope everything's okay. And it is very scary depending on the case that you're doing when you are that caseworker. And so that's why I like to associate it with that. But I'll kind of explain it to you here, and then we can talk about more examples. But so in the inner circle, and inside the house, so the circle inside the house, we start by inviting the child to draw themselves in the center of the house. That this reinforces that our focus is on the child and how they experience and how they feel about the world around them. So we ask them to fill in the blank space between the walls with things that they enjoy or like about their house and family, such as traditions, routines, people. So the semicircle underneath the house, so the outer circle, is we ask the child to think about the people who they like visiting at their house, and you think about people who can be or have already been involved with the family. So the circles of safety and support to ensure the child's ensure the safety of the child. The red circle that's at the very bottom, those are the people that the child does not want allowed in the house, such as unsafe people, deal breakers, or threats of their safety. The roof, this is the rules of the safety house. So you can invite the child to create the rules for their new safety house, and how does the child want everyone in their house to behave. And emphasize to them that the rules are meant to keep everyone safe. And then the path of the safety house is the scaling process to safety. So we use the sidewalk as a safety scale and ask the child to draw themselves on the path or color the path almost like a thermometer to represent how safe they feel in their home. So any other way that makes sense to you and the child is also fine there. So, we have an example to kind of show you, but when thinking about like going on trial home placement, like you can also help them, if we have certain rules as DHS of saying like, this can't happen, this can't happen, you can put those in there and have those open conversations with the child about how these are the rules of the house and this is what should be going on. That way they know, like even at a young age, like they should know like what shouldn't be happening. So, like my 3 houses that I did, obviously the kids shouldn't be seeing the stuff that they call stuff, like that shouldn't be happening in front of them. And that's something that we could put in here of saying like, that's something that you shouldn't have to see, and having those open conversations with them. And then in the red circle, like they might not identify them as an unsafe person. where DHS might, and that's where we can put in there like, so-and-so is not supposed to be in this house that we're creating. So they understand by going home on trial home placement, like this person's not supposed to be in this home. So they know also like, okay, this person's not supposed to be here. So I need to make sure that they're not. So then when workers go and do these home visits, they can bring the safety house back out with them and say, okay, let's talk about it. You know, have you seen this person? And just kind of building on that safety house tool and showing them that their voice does matter and that they know what's going on and what's expected out of them and their parents, and in a kid appropriate way, obviously. But if we don't care to go on to the next slide so we can show the example. So this is an example of a safety house, and this was used as part of reunification to inform a safety plan. And she's 10, so it's kind of hard to see, but you can see that she's drawn things and she's we've talked about the rules, and I used to have the case scenario almost memorized, Cassie, but it's been a while since we've talked about the safety house. So I don't know if you have it more memorized than me to kind of help me explain her story a little bit.
If I remember, I'm pretty sure it's a domestic violence situation. It's been a while since I looked at you, and I more so put it in because I wanted y'all to have like at least a visual of one filled out. Mm-hmm. So it's domestic violence. So in the red circle, like semicircle at the very bottom, that's who she has listed in that circle was like mom's boyfriend, who's not allowed in the home. And if you'll notice on the door, so that brown that kind of looks like a doorknob is actually a giant lock. Because she wanted a giant lock on the door because that's what made her feel safe, and to keep mom's ex-boyfriend out. And so like her people that are in her support network, she listed her foster family. That's like the little family that's off on towards the left side, and then her mom's friend is in the green dress, and then the pink dress, that's one of her friends from school, and then her grandparents are the other couple that's on there. And then you'll see on the path the little tiny one that I think has got a purple on, but that's where she put herself on the safety path. And she said that she felt there because, you know, mom's ex-boyfriend was out of the home and she had kept him out of the home. And so she was starting to feel safer. So, you know, the door would be like a 10, you know, like totally safe. I feel great. Like I'm ready to be in the home. But then out towards the streets where they're going to be like more like, no, I don't feel safe at all. And so she's kind of in the middle of that path, but she's getting pretty close to the door.
So do we have any thoughts on this tool before we move on? I know it's a lot of information that we're throwing at you all at once, but you do have the participant guide, and, you know, like Cassie said, you were going to get our emails at the end of this. So if you have any questions that you didn't feel comfortable asking during the training, you can always email us privately, or if you need clarification on something, we're all here. So with that being said, I'll let Cassie.
Yeah, so the next part we're going to talk about is building safety and support networks. So that is really like the cornerstone of safety organized practice. And Sherita, do you mind going on the next one for me? Did we lose Sherita? Yeah, we lost her. There we go. Okay. So we cannot plan for safety with only the people we're worried about. We have to start with at least one other person who could not have caused the harm. And I think this is a area that we really struggle with within DCFS, especially like y'all may not see the initial side of it, but in immediate safety planning, like just planning with the parents. Well, that's who caused the harm. If they weren't going to cause the harm, we wouldn't be here in the first place, right? So we've got to have those other people involved to help ensure the safety of the child. And that's why this is the cornerstone of safety organized practice. Ideally, the investigator or the DR worker would get the first network member involved. And then like if it's a foster care case or protective service case, the FSW would then help build and add as many people to the network as possible to cover all the different worries. And you may have different network members that support different things. Like, you know, we may be really worried about a child's school. So maybe we pull somebody from like the school, like a teacher or somebody who has an educational background that could help that child specifically with that. You know, we need to pull people who could watch the child. If it's a substance abuse case, you know, we need those people who are willing to take the child if mom calls and says, hey, I'm thinking about using, I need you to come get my child, or let me bring you my child. So really focusing around building that support network. And Carlee said this earlier, you know, we go slow at the beginning to go fast later. And a lot of times I feel like we do the opposite. Within DCFS, we don't really focus on building that support network, right? Like it's just, let's get the parents through these services and do what we can. And then when the child's about to go home, it's like, oh my gosh, panic. We need to get some people to support this family because we're all about to be out of their lives. But think about how much easier it would be if we did that on the front end of a case, right? Whenever we first take a child into care and we start pulling people from the community, people, you know, whether it's relatives, friends, whoever, you know, and pull them into, you know, our family team meetings that we'll have and make them part of the team, that gives us a lot more eyes on the children. You know, it gives us a lot more people to say, hey, this parent is actually making that behavioral change that we need to see. And so that helps in a lot of ways. Yes, it can be more work coordinating a larger support network, but in the long run, it helps, you know, helps the parent for one. It gives them, you know, an outlet, a break, somebody they know who has their back. But at the end of the day, our goal, right, is to make sure that the child is safe. And so these are people that help us ensure that, because all of our, which I know, you know, sometimes Casa stays in touch even afterwards, and, you know, but really like a lot of our time is limited. We're not involved forever. And DCFS, we don't want to be involved forever, right? Like our goal is to help this family build sustainable safety so that when we step out, we don't have to see that family again, that they can do it on their own. And that even if, you know, a parent who has a substance abuse problem slips up and has a relapse, you know, a year, 2 years later, there's a support network that can step in and help them care for their child. And so that maybe that doesn't result in the child end up back, you know, coming back into foster care. And, you know, some of the goals, like they become less isolated. They have people in their life by choice who can help them reduce risk and increase safety. It reduces dependence on professional supports. And then also, you know, like I said, we really want to reduce the likelihood of a new referral. And so this is a tool that we've been training on. It's called the Circles of Safety and Support. And so the goal here is to really start helping the family. It's really meant to be a conversation with the family to help them identify support networks. I know when I worked with families and I would be like, hey, tell me about your support network, they would kind of look at me like, I don't have anybody. Like, who are you talking about? You're crazy. So this approaches that conversation in a different way. So the Circles of Safety and Support, it starts with the one, so the center circle, and that's just where you're going to put the name or photo, picture of the child, like however you want to do it. And then two, the second circle is going to be who already knows everything that's happening. Like, who already knows you're involved with DCFS? Who do you talk to every day about what's going on? Who do you call whenever your caseworker leaves and you're like, oh my gosh, you know, I can't believe what they did. All those sorts of things. Like, who are those people that know everything? And you list all of them. We'll sort out if they're appropriate, you know, to really be involved in the network afterwards. But let's get those names on paper. And then the three is who knows a little bit about what's happened. So who maybe knows some things, like maybe knows the kids are in care but don't know the full story. And then you'll put those in the three. And then four are who are people that are involved in your life but don't really know anything, or maybe like distant relatives that you haven't talked to in several years. Who are those people? And let's put those down. And so then you work on like your people that are in the 3 and 4 circles. Can we move them up a circle? Like, maybe you do have this relative and you just haven't talked to them in years. So let's reach out to them and see if they're willing to help in some way, whether that's a placement option or, you know, even if it's just like some sort of logistical support, like I'll drive mom to her appointments or things like that. So that's what this is meant to do, is really to pull all those names out in a way that is more than just being like, well, tell me who the support people are. Does anybody have any questions about that? So the next is collaborative plans, which kind of goes with the support network. Because we want everybody involved in that planning, but we for sure want to make sure we're including the parents. And we want to make sure that they are, for the most part, in agreement. I know they're not always going to be, but we want them to start at least taking actions for what's in the case plan, like towards achieving those goals that we set, even if they don't necessarily agree with, our worry statement or why the child came into care. But we just want to get them to start and get them at least to have some sort of consensus agreement with us that they will, at least start taking these steps so we can get their child home. And there are 2 plans in the participant guide for Cheryl. And they just kind of, like, one plan is very, service focused, like, she will take her medication and she will, I think, go to counseling, very just, services, that's all it is. And then the second one talks about, really getting her support network involved, right? So like her neighbor Paul and sister Sarah and the foster mom and intensive home worker, they agree to be part of the safety network. So just even naming that up, that they're going to be involved. And then Cheryl will ask for help if she is feeling more than a 7 out of 10 on a scale for depression. So 10 would be she's, extremely depressed. So if she's more than a 7, she's going to reach out for help. Cheryl will not be alone if she's thinking about hurting herself. And Cheryl agrees to keep a logbook of her work in resisting in resisting the worst parts of her depression. She will rate her depression's impact every day in the book and detail everything that is helping her reduce the impact. And it talks about how the network will, each one of them will call her at least once a day to check in how she's doing and rate her depression. And then the intensive in-home worker will visit the home 2 or 3 times a week. And they'll be available 24 hours a day if Cheryl wants to call. And then it talks about how, like, the team will meet again to review the plan in a couple of weeks. So just getting more than the parent will do this, the parent will do this, the parent will do this. DCFS, may have like 2 or 3 things on there, like DCFS will do this. So like I said, it's that collaboration piece, right? We want to build that support network, and then we want to bring all of those members to the team and get them in on the case plan. There are things that they can do to help, right? There are things that they can help with the parent to make those behavioral changes, as well as, they can help us know that the parent is actually making that behavioral change, because, we don't have time to be with the parent 24/7 or even check in every single day. So when we have that support network and that collaboration with them, there are people who are probably talking to mom every day. And so we just need to get those people involved with us as well. And so then that kind of like talking about the plans. So moving to a paradigm shift. And this is like one area that I've kind of, even myself, feel like I have struggled in some. So I know a lot of times, like, we want parents to automatically have insight to what they've done, right? Like, we want them to tell us that what they did was wrong, or we want them to admit to us what they did. But at the end of the day, like, what matters is that they're taking actions, right? They're taking actions to change their behavior and make that next step. So instead of like focusing on the insight first, we really need to start focusing on those actions. What if we created plans that called for actions to begin immediately, with the notion that once actions begin, often insight will follow. And even if it doesn't, like I said, ultimately doesn't matter as long as the child is safe and the parent has made that behavioral change to ensure the child is safe. So I don't know, that's something that I have kind of struggled with some, because I do, we'll think about it at times like, I want the parent to tell me what they did was wrong. But at the end of the day, if the parent does everything and truly makes that behavioral change, I mean, they know, right? They know what they did is wrong. So what are we doing? What is it benefiting by forcing them to say it out loud, right? We just need to see that behavioral change. And so that moves us, like I said, was starting with actions. The best predictor of future maltreatment is past maltreatment. And the best predictor of future actions of protection are past actions of protection. So the sooner caregivers are starting to demonstrate new protective actions that respond to the harm and danger, the better. And so, like I said, we just really, as soon as we can, we want to start helping that family really move towards the behavioral change rather than just saying, complete your drug treatment and those sorts of things, and having those conversations with them about getting that support network involved, because that's also actions, right? Showing them that they can lean on a support network that can help them and that they're not alone in caring for their child. I know, a lot of times people set New Year's resolutions, right? Like, I'm going to go to the gym every day. But when I say I'm going to do that by myself, it does not happen. The times I've been successful with that is when I've had other people there to help me along the way. And so again, we have got to be more intentional about helping build that support network. And all of that kind of moves us into the next section. We're going to talk briefly about family time, which we're trying to change our language from visitation to family time. And so this is, family time really offers that time for families to show that they're making that behavioral change, right? They have actions of protections. And that's really, when a child's in foster care, it's one of the only times we get to see it, is when they're actually, having family time with their child. Carlee, you want to take over?
So I was going to share the participant guide, but I've completely lost it, because in the participant guide, it has those 8 assumptions about family time that I was going to kind of talk about here, but I don't know why my computer's being so weird. So do you care to share that, Cassie, so we can talk about
trying to get
those?
it pulled up.
Okay. So a little bit about what Cassie was saying. So the family time concept is just it's a better way that results when families have had a role in planning their contact with their children and receiving family time coaching with workers, and it makes it more concrete. It makes more concrete opportunities to discuss their behavioral changes when you're actually having those visits, not just in the office where there's so much stuff going on. So this is in your participant guide. I believe it's on page 37.
There it is. Sorry.
You're good. Is it 37?
It's the last page, yeah.
Very last page. So this is just some, there's 8 of them, I believe, of just some different assumptions about family time. And so just kind of talking about it. And so we have family time is directed and tied to reunification rates. And through that visitation between parents and children, it's motivating factor for parents to progress through their safety case plan and treatment plan. And so trying to encourage those visits, outside of the DHS office, inside the home, where the kids are going to go home to, how is family time there? Are the kids, how are the kids acting in family time at the home? Family time can be comfortable and enjoyable when it's in an environment that is, comfortable for the whole family. Parents will have worries about family time if it's in an artificial setting and monitored by someone that they don't know. So it's helpful to know about those worries ahead of time. So having the workers sit down and talk with families and talk about, what are your concerns about visitation, instead of just texting them and saying, here's your visit schedule. You need to be here at the DHS office at such and such time. Children might have questions about the worries about their parents, progress in the case, and what might happen when they see their parents. And that's also helpful to talk about those worries ahead of time and, making sure everyone understands what family time is. So then talking about, if there's no other vehicles by which the parents can demonstrate their increasing, safety, that they contract with their children. Safety services do not equal safety. And so making sure that we are understanding that. And the network must participate in family time. So the more the merrier. So, if you have a provisional that can watch the visit or can participate in family time, they need to be doing that, because that's what life is going to look like after we're out of their life. And essentially that's our goal with every case, is to how can we get out of their life and make sure that kids are safe. So the parents need to become less isolated and reconnected with their supports. Also, parents increase the amount of demonstrated safety with their children. Their family time and other forms of contact should increase by this. And this is the progression of visitation and should be directly tied to the safety plan and goal statement achievement. And then also, for the most part, when the goal statement and the 3 research-based reunification standards are met, then the consideration of the children's return home should be in full swing by doing the family time concept. So, Cassie, do you have anything else to add, or if there's any questions?
I can't think of anything. I think one thing we really don't take into consideration a lot whenever we are, facilitating family time right now as an agency is the family's culture. I mean, that just doesn't really come up a whole lot. Maybe there are specific holidays that family observes that maybe we just wouldn't even think about, and not something that's very important to them. And so having those conversations and really taking their cultural considerations, in whenever we do family time, because we don't talk about that. What kind of activities do y'all enjoy doing together? What kind of foods do y'all like? So just different things like that. I think we need to do a better job as an agency really taking in, which I know like DCFS more so that's on us, but y'all play such a large role in all of our kids' lives. So y'all can really advocate for that, or even, talk to the children or parents yourselves about like, what do they see visitation or family time looking like? What do they want out of that time? And you can even relay that back to the caseworker. I do have a glossary of safety organized practice terms of like what, we're transitioning visitation to family time, safety, health and safety factor to safety threat. So like I have all of that in a glossary that I can send to y'all also, if that will be helpful.
Cassie, I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
This is Sandula from Pulaski County CASA. Really appreciate you ladies doing this presentation. Regarding building that safety network, support network around families, I know one of the barriers we have had in the past has been confidentiality issues. So let's say inviting the neighbor Paul, who was helpful to the family, or even the grandparents in the case, to come to a family team meeting. A lot of times, we have the issues of the department saying they're not a party to the case. We really can't invite him in, and we are dealing with confidential information. Are you going to have like a little policy shift here on this, or is it going to be on a case-by-case basis regarding those people who could be the support network?
Yeah, so ultimately it probably will come down case to case. I will say though, like it's in our policy currently that the family can invite whoever they want to a staffing. So, I think it's more, Cynthia, we're doing a lot more messaging around that, like making sure that the family is inviting those people and giving that option. Now, like if it is something, a lot of times how we, like DCFS, we are gatherers of information, right? We should not be giving out information. Now, obviously, if they're part of like a safety network, they will need some information. And if they're coming to family team meetings, like they need some information. But if they're at a family team meeting, that is because the parent, said it was okay for them to be there. Ultimately, the support network is the families. And if they don't want a support network, we can't make them build one. But we do have to stick to our bottom line that like, you need other people in your life to help ensure the safety. So I don't know if that helps answer that. And I mean, we could always have staff, like they could have release of information signed just to, cover themselves in case they felt like they needed to.
And that's something you're dealing with a worker that's saying, oh, the grandparents can't be here, or what, you can ask them, you can follow that up and say, well, let's ask the family to fill out a release of information so they can be a support to them. Because like Cassie said, we are messaging this out and trying to, I mean, that's not changed, kind of like what she said, but we're talking about it a lot more. But just this is we've been doing this since we started with the rollout at the beginning of the summer, right, Cassie? So it's just have some grace, I guess, for us actually implementing a lot of these things, just because it is new to some workers, or sometimes we get in our old habits as being seasoned workers. And so it's going to be a shift for everyone. So just keeping that in mind as well.
Yeah, and I will say, if you're in Pulaski, I know quite a few of you are, y'all may see a little bit slower transition because there has been such a high turnover rate. We don't currently have them doing deep dives, so we have a pretty extensive training schedule. And we don't have them doing the deep dives right now, just because if we did them right now, turnover has been so high that by the time we got everybody trained, there wouldn't be anybody left. So we're waiting till it stabilizes a little bit more, but any new worker that comes on is getting SOP and new worker training. So through Mid-South. So they are getting exposure to it, and we plan to start deep dives with the supervisors in Pulaski in April. And so deep dives there's a series of 8 modules. It's a 1-day training each month that covers like a specific topic that we covered today. So like there's a whole module, 1-day module just on the 3 houses in the safety house. That takes up an entire day. There's a whole day on just building support networks. So y'all can see why we're like, this is very high level because we do a whole day of training on, any one of these topics we can spend an entire day on. And right now, most of the state, with the exception of 6 and 7, because 7 was kind of in the same boat as Area 6. But the rest of the state, they're currently in Deep Dive Module 3, which is harm, worry, and goal statements. And so the goal is, hopefully they will be a lot better in using those more within the next month or so, now that they've really had more training on it. Sherita, will you go to the next slide for me? I think it covers.
Well, while you're talking about that, maybe say a few of the county. I don't know if you know of any specific counties in Area 7, just in case we have new advocates on here and they might not know where.
So that's going to be like Jefferson County, Lone Oak, kind of that like South Central more so area, and they haven't started deep dives yet. Now I will say so this is our training series. Like I said, it's very intensive. So all of our staff has gone through the orientation. So that's essentially what we did today. Our supervisors went through a facilitative safety organized practice 2-day training. And then we didn't do a 3-day, we broke it down into a series of e-learning modules that staff watched. And then they had a 2-hour wrap-up session after each set of 3, and there were a total of 9. So they did 3 2-hour sessions essentially after the e-learning modules. Right now we are in deep dives, and then we're not sure when we will start working with an Across Differences or the Coaching Institute yet. Obviously we got to get through deep dives first, and we will finish those up, I believe, around August, but then we will move right into structured decision-making training. So be a little graceful with our staff right now. They have a ton of training on top of all their other job duties, but the goal is that they will be able to do their jobs more efficiently, and we will be able to better serve families, by the end of this.
So Cassie, I have a quick question, because I think that DCFS has always done a really good job at offering good training for staff. What will be the follow-up on implementation to ensure that it's being implemented? I think that we're in the process.
Great question.
It's a great question. So for one, Angie, I will say we've already done a ton more safety organized practice training than pretty much any training I've gotten within the state ever. Like even more, probably more intensive than new staff training was for me. So I will say that like they're already getting a lot better foundation of it than anything we've done. And I think that's been hard for staff because they automatically go to a training and they think there's going to be no follow-up. This is like, we're coming to this training, we're done, that's it. but that's not how this has been. So that's already kind of shifted some people, and some people have started using the tools and see how well it works, and they are completely bought in. And like, I'm using this because like Carlee will tell you, she thinks about the families that are not getting SOP. She like has a panic attack because she's like, there's millions of families that aren't getting this, because she knows how well it works, right? But also in addition to that, we have an implementation team that will work on like a CQI method. So we'll create some sort of CQI method where there will be regular reviews to monitoring how often safety organized practice is being used. We will have the coaching institute. So there will be coaches in each area that, you know, they can help staff there really, you know, hone in on safety organized practice and develop their skills and make sure they're using it in practice. So we do have ways that we will continue to follow up. We are modeling ours a lot after San Diego. So San Diego did this, I want to say like started early 2011 ish, but they have actually reduced their foster care numbers by 38% since starting safety organized practice. So like, if, you know, we plan to continue to follow through with implementation, and hopefully, you know, that's our goal. Like if we can reduce kids in foster care by that much, that is amazing. And so that's what we're hoping for.
And then one other question in conjunction with that. So new employees, are they being trained with this from the start now? Because there's lots of openings here. So if they're being trained, I mean, I can see the benefits of that for sure.
Yeah, it's actually a lot easier with new staff because it's all they know, right? They don't they don't know the other stuff. Yeah, so it is built into new staff training that Mid-South does. They have it built into their foundations. I can't remember if it's fully built into concentrations yet or not, but I do know that they're started with that. And they will have to do deep dives. So even new workers that come on, that'll be something we run annually, and we'll probably run it on the school year after this first year. And so every new worker, they will kind of just jump in when they start, because they don't necessarily have to be in order.
Okay, awesome. Thank you.
You're welcome. And we are training resource and adoptions as well. It's not just casework, it's everybody across the board. If they're an FSW, they're getting trained.
Just on behalf of Pulaski County, I know Celeste set this up. Thanks, Celeste, but also Cassie and all of you guys. I mean, this has been a great training. We appreciate you opening it up to other programs, and really excited to see things in the future, and just fingers crossed for smooth, quick implementation, because I can see the benefits.
Thank you. Well, thank you for having us. And if there are other, you know, counties on here that like want some more training or would like it for their own county, please reach out to us, and we're happy to train the whole state. We want everybody to know about this because we love it. We're very passionate about it. And like I said, we've already seen the benefits that it can have, and really from some of our staff that have really, you know, started using it a lot.
I'm gonna put my email address in the chat just for people that are not with our program. If y'all want a copy of the manual that they've been referring to in the slides, then just shoot me an email and I can get that out to you.
And I'm gonna put my email as well. That way, if y'all want, y'all can reach out to me. If you have any questions, Carlee, Gail, Sherita, Carla, if y'all are still on, if y'all don't mind to drop in. Also, but you're welcome to reach out to any of us. Like I said, we've all been training this for over a year now, or about a year now. So
awesome. Celeste, were we set up to record today? We're recording, aren't we?
Yes, it's been recorded.
Okay, so Cassie, do we have permission to put that like on our YouTube so that our other advocates that might not have been here today can access it? Is that okay?
Yeah, that's totally fine. Yeah, somebody had actually reached out to me that asked if it was going to be recorded, so I'm totally fine with that.
Okay, we'll upload it to our YouTube so that it can be shared. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. So thanks for having us. I really appreciate CASA. I actually started out as a CASA before I was a caseworker, so.
Well, I know everybody that's had interactions with you has loved working with you. So
Thanks.
that CASA background sets you up well, girl.
it did, you know, it worked very well for in White County because I had great connections with all the CASA workers.
Awesome.
Thank you, Cassie and Carlee and Sherita. This is very, very good.
You're welcome. I guess let us know if y'all need anything else or if y'all want further training. We can do some more in-depth stuff. Like if you have a particular topic you would like us to cover, we can do that. So.
All right. Thank you. I appreciate everybody showing up today. I wrote down, and I'm sure Angie did too, the Pulaski CASAs, so we can give you your training hour credit. But again, my email is in the box if you want. If you didn't save the attachments earlier when they were in there, if you want them emailed to you, just shoot me an email and I'll get them to you. Thank y'all. Have a good one. Bye.